Alrighty, guys. I think we got one more we're waiting for. I guess we'll just go ahead and jump into it. But yeah, how's everyone doing this morning? You're here for Hot Ace, your listing presentation. Let me get a quick sense of you guys. What's sort of the experience level here? Who is like 1 year or less licensed? That's you? Okay, awesome. Congratulations. 2 to 3 years or so, kind of feeling like you're starting to get underway pretty well. Gotcha. And then who's the grizzled veterans here? 3 to 5 years plus. Is that okay? Awesome. Now I'm just curious. With a class like this, is a lot of this, the impetus for you guys being here? Is this just to get more of a general sense of the different tactic strategies that might be out there? Is it something where you feel like, hey, with listings starting to maybe come back a little bit more, a little bit easier to get listings, right? Because remember 2013 to 2018, it was this many buyers, but very few listings and also very few listing opportunities. Is it maybe a dynamic where now this is going to be a bigger part of the puzzle moving forward, and you're really trying to tune up those skills? I mean, give me a sense here. Like, is it, boy, I'm just not really thriving with listing presentations, or is it like, hey, I'm pretty good, but just a bit of fine tuning? What's maybe the vibe here in the room?
I'm not obtaining any kind of information and adding to that skill set to get more clients.
Gotcha. And succeed when you have those opportunities. We know how choice listing opportunities are, and a big part of this class is hey, this is chance to really succeed. I mean, listings are great because of the labor to return on that effort component. Obviously, buyers are a little bit more labor intensive, but also listings oftentimes you can maximize from a marketing standpoint and use that to find more buyers. So we all know that listings are really key. And oftentimes it is that dynamic when you're in there for that listing presentation where I always kind of felt like this is, it's my chance to succeed or not. And I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can in that presentation, in the dynamic. I'm walking out with that listing commitment. Nothing's ever a guarantee, but certainly what I can control is my process, my effort, my approach to making sure that I give myself the best odds. And that's a lot of what we're talking about here. So as we progress, I think you'll see that there's not a ton of magic with this stuff. I mean, I think you'll see that there's a flow through with the steps, and certain steps make more sense or are more impactful. It's the way you put them in a sequence, in order. But ultimately, in fact, just diving into the class here, it really comes down to kind of creating a structure for yourself. So let me kind of take it from that standpoint. In fact, actually, before I begin with that, I don't mind questions with my presentations. I'd like it to be a little bit more of a dialogue. I think even when we're kind of sitting here on the table, it should be more of like a round table discussion. Obviously I'll be driving a lot of the content, but feel free to raise your hand. With this one, it's a fairly succinct class, so we should have plenty of time if there is some back and forth. If we do have some of the questions, a couple things I'll ask is, one, if it looks like we're going kind of too far down the weeds, I might kind of have to bring that back and say, hold on, we don't want to get too far off topic. But the other part is if we do have a bit of the back and forth, if you guys don't mind, let's just not have the side conversations. Then otherwise I get my stern teacher hat on and kind of rein you guys back in. So, fair enough? Alrighty. So again, kind of come from the standpoint of, boy, a listing, presentation that's oftentimes an opportunity. And that the strength of that presentation really determines whether you're walking away with that listing or not, right? So for me, I always looked at it. In fact, some of the best advice I had early in my career, even prior to real estate sales, was the best salespeople are canned. You want to create a structure for yourself. For something like this, where it's going to be done on a repeated basis. This is a core aspect of what we do to find listing business. It was really, I felt, incumbent upon me to figure out the best path, find the ideal way to say things, to lay out that structure, and then pretty much set and repeat, until I find something better. It's funny, if you probably had a video camera of all my listing presentations, you'd see that it's almost the same way every time, even sometimes my little, anecdotal jokes or this or that, not because I'm lacking imagination or what have you, you just kind of learn that this stuff sort of works. And again, set and repeat. Why would I deviate off of that if this is what seemed to get the best results? The only change I'm going to make is as I learn, as I progress. If I see that there's some areas that I'm not as strong as I'd like to be with, I'll make those adjustments. Is this something you guys? Oh, okay. We'll pass that around.
Oh, sorry.
And also if I come to something where there's structural advantages, and hey, if I roll this in, or you know what, this line could work better, as far as ultimately getting the desired outcome, those are the types of changes that I'll make, right? And so the other part of the benefit of having a structure with this is it really takes a lot of the pressure off. You're not having to sit there in the meeting and think about what am I going to say next, where do we go from here, how do I address this point. You kind of know all that stuff, what's to come as far as the various stages, all my key talking points. And it really gives me a lot of room to, when you think about like a client engagement, you've only got like 100% of, mental bandwidth to provide. And if 30, 40, 50, 60 is focused on, what are my next steps? Oh yeah, when we get here, I got to make sure I say this or that. Thank you. That's going to eat up a lot of that mental bandwidth. And there's less room to focus on listening to my client, on really making that connection. In fact, we'll get to that in just a little bit. But the heart of really winning these listing opportunities ultimately is making a connection, is making a breakthrough. It's not always the person that comes out that's got the crispest presentation or the slickest looking, leave behind or what have you. Ultimately, it's the one that somehow kind of got on the inside a little bit. And when they open up to you and open up, that through rapport, that trust starts to get established, now you're a little bit on the inside, and maybe they'll let you know, like, well, look, we like this, but need a little bit more of that, or here's a concern for us. And you're having a different kind of dynamic, and sometimes even, certain things where maybe had you been pushing, in a certain direction, and that was going to be your path, but now that they've raised a few concerns, you can kind of shift, what have you. And really make sure it's, again, the right, conversation for them addressing their needs. But also, if they like you a little bit, it just really helps. And oftentimes you'll see, and really for the majority of your listing presentations, it's typically going to be the one broker, and if they like it, they'll just go with you. But I think we are going to be a dynamic moving forward where there's going to be probably more conversations where they've already talked with another broker or some of the other, systems that are out there, marketing themselves, iBuyer, whatever it might be, So coming in, it may be a little bit more competitive. And again, it's that connection, being on the inside. If they like you a little bit, where oftentimes even if they didn't, you didn't have the slickest presentation, or somebody else might be offering a little bit of this or a little bit of that. When they like you, you got a chance sometimes to compete on those areas. They'll let you know what those hot buttons are, and they'll give you a chance to win that. So that was kind of a long-winded way of saying when you've got this structure, it really, I can kind of come in there and breathe a little bit more easily because I'm not, again, having to think about what's coming next. Oh yeah, at this point I got to remember to say these points. It just, I feel like I'm comfortable with that process. It gives me that much more focus on making the connection, establishing the trust, establishing the rapport, and really getting underway with the dynamic that truly is going to be, ultimately where the decision lies. Where that yes, not that the broker gets. It's typically, for that type of dynamic, that person they like, they trust, that they can see themselves working forward with. So what we're talking about here at this process is, a structure. Step by step, there is a logic to the sequence as far as how it unfolds. I mean, none of this is really magic, frankly. It's just, having some core consistent steps. A lot of the stuff has been borne out over time as far as the best practices and, really sort of dialed in that way. But for you guys, if you're already succeeding with your listing presentations, maybe there's a couple little, tidbits you can take that might, elevate your outcomes. But also for those brokers that are still kind of looking for, a system that really works for them and maybe not quite as comfortable with the listing presentations yet, this can be something that might have a little bit more, benefit throughout and even potentially taking on, that structure altogether as part of your process. But at any rate, I feel like my job here is to really just educate you guys about, some good ways that you can progress out there on the listing side, some good ideas, and it's up to you to really take that and figure out what's going to work best for your business. So, any questions on that?
Would you ever modify your approach if you knew you were the only agent they were meeting with versus you were the first of three or the third of three?
Sure. Yeah. And great question. I mean, that's not exactly something we totally get into this, but again, from that concept of having a structure, and then, those are the types of things too, where you can sort of read the tea leaves and say, hey, it's just me. And we do talk about that a little bit. I think sometimes people, like when it's just you, and especially if it's your sphere, what have you, sometimes you get a little casual with it. You come out, they know me, we're all good. But we forget, from a psychology standpoint, even if they are our friends or relationships or what have you, there's a lot of angst and anxiety potentially with selling,
Money.
Yeah, well, and I think
They're
anytime there's
paying
money that comes with it. And truly, I mean, that's how the sellers often look at it. This is their baby. When you're working with a buyer, it's about finding that opportunity. For the seller, it's like, this is the opportunity. We just want to make sure it doesn't get screwed up. So sometimes, when you're coming in for just, it's only you, and maybe also a little bit more likelihood if it's like with the Sphere that broker can come in and sort of take it easy a little bit. And that's I'm foreshadowing here to slide a little bit further along. With that, I think you gotta, don't leave anything on the table, even if it is your Sphere. You gotta earn their trust, because you're still their friend and all the rest, but this is a different component. Again, this is their baby, their opportunity, and they may like you as a friend and all the rest, but if they don't have the trust to be able to take care of whatever, their objective is, you're kind of dead in the water, right? So, that's one part, I think, if it is the one for. Also, or if I'm the only one that's talking with them, and also I'm probably not, raising my, competition or talking about, if you talk with other brokers, this, that, or what have you, because I don't know, I just don't want to put that bug in their head, like, hey, we should call somebody, well, Philip even mentioned it.
Get a second, third opinion.
Like
Yeah.
asking us,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
maybe I should.
Yeah.
But if it is something where there's going to be other voices in the mix, one thing I do try to play defense a little bit, so some of the areas where you see things going away from you is sometimes people, it's called this, is they buy the listing. Maybe the seller wants to get $450 for it, it's really only worth $425, but that the seller's pretty much hung up on that price point, and you're just going to go along with it, even though it's oftentimes not the right strategy, and frankly, if you're overpriced by too much, it can really be problematic, and oftentimes it leads to not a sale, and to a difficult client experience, client-broker dynamic. Usually at some point they start to doubt the broker because it's just not moving, and why aren't we getting offers? The neighbor sold in 3 days, and blah blah blah. And it's like, all day long you can tell them it's overpriced, but once they've started to lose trust in that broker, they don't, they that's just an excuse. They kind of just blame you, more than anything. So
What if
oftentimes.
I set the expectation?
Pardon?
I mean, if I set the expectation, because I had a couple, of course, every seller wants, the most for the property, even
Yeah.
though they know it might not be the price. But I always tell them, I think that's too much, but we can go with that, but just remember that if it stays on the market, then we
Yeah.
have to lower it. And they come and they call me after a week, you know what, you were right. So if you set the expectation from the beginning, there shouldn't be that doubt that
Yeah.
she is not giving me the information that I need.
And it's sometimes not only just setting that in the beginning, which is absolutely critical to avoid falling into that territory. If, because there are certain times I'll take an overpriced listing if we're not too far from, if we're one or two price adjustments from where we need to get to. If you're way out of the ballpark, forget it. By the time you've done a couple of price adjustments, they've lost their stomach for anything further. And again, they really just start to doubt the broker, and it doesn't matter what you say, how true or not true, they just don't want to hear it. And so oftentimes I've seen this from a coaching standpoint. 2 months in, the relationship is just ruptured. It's a really uneasy ride for the last 4 months of that 6-month listing period, before it expires. And then at the very end, you've been telling them, we got to drop it 30K, whatever it is. At the very end, another broker comes in the mix. They like this person. They say, hey, we got to drop it 30K. Sure, whatever you say, we'll do that. But you're the hero. We're not listening to the other broker. They're the goat, and so it can even be the exact same recommendations, but it's just that voice no longer has the trust with it. So if it is multiple, I want to say, look, it's really about finding out what is the market willing to pay for this, and having the strategy to get every red cent out of that. I want them to understand that this isn't something where somehow Philip's got a magic wand, some special marketing pieces where I can get $475, but the other broker can only get $425. Frankly, as far as exposure, getting the word out, if we're just putting the listing in, we're on RE Colorado here.
Mm-hmm.
If we're just doing the listings input in RE Colorado, there's that section Internet Display. If you're doing IDX, which is all the feeds, searchable on all the brokers' websites, whatever that consumer might be looking for. If you're doing syndication, which is Nextdoor, Zillow, Realtor.com, and Homes.com, and not only those, but those sites actually feed to KW.com and then Realogy and blah blah blah, right? And so that kind of exposure, along with the fact that when you follow the NAR stats, they're saying 92%. Actually, it used to be 92%, now 95% buyers use electronic media in their home search. So even if they see that property, you know, physically first, they're still going to look it up on their phone and you know, see it like that. So, you know, when it comes to somehow this notion, like I might have some marketing widgets where I find some buyers that are willing to pay more that other people may not, you know, that's a complete misnomer. You know, once we're in the MLS, it is full exposure, and the market has a logic to itself. You'll see where you fit in, you know, from pricing standpoint. And so, you know, once you're that exposed, it's just really the market's going to speak and say, you know, this is where we see the value. So again, I want to kind of get across some of those points that, you know, somebody else comes in and says, oh, I've got a couple special widgets and I can do X, Y, Z. No, you know, really the exposure part, we're all at the same, you know, level with that, and nobody really has, you know, these you know, facets at hand, or these, you know, magic bullets or magic wand, whatever it might be. You know, so that type of stuff, and then along with that, you know, you want to be cautious. We want to talk about the right price, and in fact, we'll get to this. There's a lot of different ways that you can shoot yourself in the foot when you overprice, and my job is to help you make the right decisions. You know, I oftentimes will frame it, you know, a transaction is nothing more than a string of decisions, the quality of which, the sum quality of which, ends up to the outcome. And if I'm helping you make the right decisions as we progress, you are going to get that best chance at the right outcome, you know. And if I'm doing it right and stoke a little bit of competition, you know, what have you, you know, maybe this is what the market's willing to pay. Maybe just, you know, I mean, obviously my goal is I have to get every red cent of that, and every now and then you manufacture a little bit of competition and you know, supersede that just a tick, you know. So that's really what's at hand. But a lot of as you'll see in the presentation, a lot of what I'm really trying to get across with this is, one, handling some of those objections up front, and two, really trying to position it so that my clients and me, or you know, those prospects, we're a team fighting against the market to get the best of what we can, versus somehow we're at loggerheads. You know, they're saying 450, I'm saying 425, and you know, I'm forcing it through, but you know, the trust component and all that stuff sort of goes by the wayside as we, you know, push on that. So in general, I guess a long-winded way of answering your question, if it's just me only, you know, I'm probably going to make sure I really tee off and do all I can to not invite the specter of, hey, should we talk to somebody else? And at the same time, I'm not going to mention, like, by the way, if you talk with other brokers, blah, 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 and then, you know, they're like, oh, well, we'll just, again, you know, call people.
Maybe we should be.
But on the other hand, if it is more than one, I'm not trying to denigrate anybody, but I also know that sometimes brokers come in there and try to sell and get that listing in different ways, and sometimes it is, you know, letting that seller, you know, going along with their really unrealistic price, you know, expectations. And frankly, 450 to 425 isn't even that far out of the whack. You know, there's stuff where people will, you know, okay, 505 and it's really 425, you know, and they just want the listing, and you know, it usually ends up being a bad ride. And frankly, you know, it's certainly something where as a seller, you know, wait, 505 is what this guy's saying and somebody else is 450? Well, sure, I'll try that. But then they don't realize, you know, until they go through the process, that it's actually that painful experience, you know, price adjustments, sometimes it still doesn't, you know, go off. And hence from that standpoint, I'm really just trying to save them from themselves or from that bad situation another broker might put them in.
I found with the pricing comment as well, facts are friendly. So rather than just saying like, hey, this is what I think it's worth, like in September, 40% of the homes had to have price reductions. They were 59 days on markets. Appropriate priced homes were 14 days or 21.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we can get there. To your point, I love that the analogy of it's a series of decisions to get to the transaction.
Yeah.
The first decision right now is, after are we agreeing to work with you, is where we're going to price this.
Yeah. And frankly, prices, you know, I have a class where we're at a talking point that says, you know, price is 95% of it. I was challenged by, you know, senior established broker. Are you sure it's not 99%? I can't disagree. You know, it's price, right? Because we know the exposure part. You know, if it ain't moving, right? You know, if there's not the interest, what have you, it's not that the word wasn't, you know, gotten out sufficiently. You know, so again, when I was coaching, that's a lot of my background was just coaching over the years. When I get questions from brokers saying, hey, we're just not getting a lot of traffic for the listing. Should we pop this in Craigslist or blah, blah, blah? It's like, look, if you're not getting traction for the showing, and we know how many eyes are getting these syndicated feeds, these IDX feeds, what have you. I mean, if it's the right price or the right property, the right price, there's really no way that interested party, that interested consumer, or their broker, there's really no way that they're not going to catch, you know, that property, right? So if it ain't moving, you're not getting the interest, it's not the exposure, it's not popping in Craigslist, it's more than likely, that lever, you gotta adjust the price. And even I always share my feedback with my clients, unless it's just something really egregious or nasty or what have you. But in general, I think that's really healthy, and especially if sometimes we are priced a bit too high, we've got to get that feedback. But typically what I tell my clients is when we get this feedback, rarely do they talk about price directly. I mean, it's only occasionally you get the showing feedback where it's like, if you guys drop this $86.50, you'd be right there where we need you. It's usually more like, wish it had a bigger basement, wish it had that fourth bed, whatever it is. And I was telling them to really give this proper context, just attach 3 little words at the end. Can you guys imagine what those 3 little words might be? For the price. Wish I had that bigger basement, for the price. Wish I had that fourth bedroom, for the price. Right? I can't so easily enlarge the basement, but what they're really telling me in a way is the value proposition is off. And one final point on this, and then we'll get in. Let me make sure I'm not totally going over. But for buyers, when they're out there looking at like 5, 8 properties, even their first time out on a Saturday, seeing a cross section of the homes and the price point, they pretty quickly get a nose for is the value there or not. What is a dollar buy? I mean, they're a little sliver of the price point, and it's just real simple. They walk through and usually for what we're seeing here, it's a little bit nicer, a little bit bigger, or has that fourth bedroom, or this or that, and hence that's their experience and how they how they make sense of that to themselves, and hence how the feedback comes out to us. But it's really, again, they're really talking about price directly, but it's always about price, always about that perceived value, So when you kind of frame it that way, and hence as we get in, you'll see, a huge part with this is going to be my listing presentation. I essentially see as an objections handler to get to the pricing stuff and get some of those objections that you typically hear off the table, right? So I set the table with that, and then when we get to the pricing stuff, what about this? Well, remember we talked about it, blah, blah, blah. First off, when you're raising these objections in advance, they're much, much more powerful than when you just throw them out in the moment, right? Because when you raise them in advance, then it's like, well, look, this is something that I've already said, there's a little bit more credibility with it. If they just raise an objection, I just sort of throw something in, then, well, that could be a thing, or maybe Philip's just telling us what he wants to tell us to get whatever he needs, right? So, they really understand how the pricing dynamic works, and then typically, the way I'm showing them the comps, it really bears that out. Hey, look at this property, right? You can see from the pricing history, they started too high, they had to drop it, and finally when they got there after 2.5 months, then they got under contract, right? Again, we don't want to be that. We don't want to have that same sort of ride. So you see from what I said earlier, if you overprice it, this is the experience. Here's the actual data point that bears that out. So anyway, I'm kind of foreshadowing a ton of the stuff. But why don't we jump into it and we'll progress into that. But, those are some of the concepts. And again, that's some of the way that we really sort of work on situating ourselves to where it's my clients and I against the market versus me and my clients, button heads over some of the details. So, cool. Shall we begin? All right, so agenda, keys to success, just a bit of overview stuff as far as what you're really trying to accomplish with this listing stuff. And again, some of these things I already talked about: connection, establishing rapport, trust. Types of listing presentations, the 1 for, the 2 for, high information, low information. We'll talk about some of those nuances. And then the listing presentation step by step. I'll basically just give you that choreography of how this is going to look and feel. And again, you guys can take that structure and try to import that as far as your process. If you think it works, you can take bits and pieces. It's again really just to make the knowledge base available, and then you guys can take it from there. And then final points, just a little bit of the stuff in closing that we re-emphasize. And you get it, this is all coming up, right? Okay, so again, my name is Philip Cranefoos. I handle most of the broker education for Homestead Title. My background, I've been licensed since 2008. First several years, I was really just day in, day out, working as a broker associate, like most of you guys are. I eventually moved into a leadership role, and then became brokerage founder back in 2012. From that time frame, about 2012 to 2018, at which point I sold the business, my job was really coaching, building up agent skill set, training, mentorship, getting all those calls in the field, hey, I'm about to write an offer, it's Saturday at 6 p.m., walk me through it, that type of stuff. So a lot of, what we're talking about here is things that I developed just, in my practice. And then what we did over time was turn these into things that we could then impart to our agents, brokers, people that I was coaching, to basically give them that knowledge base and help them succeed, right? So a lot of the stuff is, it's not just theoretical, but it's been field tested, it's been refined, so there's definitely some history behind what we're imparting to you guys here today. All right, so understanding the seller mindset, I think, is the first part. And again, whether it's your sphere connection, or whether this is some sort of a haven't met, kind of an arm's length lead where you haven't had a previous relationship, maybe so you just met at an open house, or, from the internet, or whatever your lead gen sources might be. But clearly understanding that seller mindset, and frankly, a lot of it is somewhat fear based. There's a lot of anxiety with the home sale. I mean, I think for both buyers and sellers in a real estate transaction, there's a lot of angst and anxiety potentially as well. I mean, people are afraid of making the wrong decision, the buy side finding the wrong home, this or that. But the nuance is, for the buyers, you're taking them out there to find that opportunity. Again, like I was mentioning at the start, for the sellers, this is their opportunity, and they just don't want to see it screwed up. The biggest thing really is they just don't want to leave money on the table, or at least not significant money. So it's really understanding that. And for some people, they handle this like champs. There's a little bit of angst, anxiety, but they manage themselves. And others, you see some pretty interesting personality traits sometimes come out through that. But the biggest thing is just, I think, understanding when we're going into these conversations that these things might be at hand. And it really puts the emphasis on establishing that rapport, the trust component, making that connection. Again, that's why that's so critical. One, that's just the human element, who you feel connected to, who you like, that you're probably going to favor them just a little bit, but also knowing that there's a lot of fear, anxiety, to soothe that, to calm that, to be the voice, in the presentation that says, look, there's a lot of that at play, but you really hope they're getting the sense that by aligning with you as a broker, that you're the one that can shepherd them through this and take them through the process and give them the right vibes, so to speak. So, don't want to leave money on the table. It's that fear-based critical mass state. Critical mass is kind of like, again, when you got a little bit of that anxiety going on, little things that might ordinarily sort of, roll off somebody's back, all of a sudden it's a huge deal. So sometimes even when you're going in with your sphere, and you think everything's hunky-dory, and they trust you, they know you already, and everything's good, and you maybe say a couple things not exactly as crisp as they would like, or didn't address some of their questions quite as effectively. That's the type of stuff where maybe they still sort of like you, but they go to bed that night with, kind of thinking about this, gosh, just didn't sit quite right. Maybe we should call that other broker, or, whatever, that mailer we've been, getting in the mail. Follow up with that agent. It's that type of stuff where brokers sometimes leave the table open to competition, by not recognizing the psychology and how to best position themselves to get the right client experience.
And it's so basic, but I remind myself every time I go on a listing appointment, because I was born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, so double the listening and half the talking.
Yep.
So like really, really picking up on not only what they say, but how they say it.
Yeah.
To really understand their motivations, so that it's not just, here's my presentation that looks the exact same as the last 4 that I did, because it's obvious. Whereas if they want to talk about comps for 45 minutes, then we can talk about comps for 45 minutes. If they want to talk about the new school district they want to move into, then we'll talk about that. And I think that comes to the last point, which is the rapport.
Yeah.
If they feel that they've really been heard, psychology, they're like, he gets us, she gets us, whoever.
Yeah.
And I think you've gotten up on the competition.
Yeah, and I think that's actually the next slide. Making that connection is so much having them open up. So it's almost like we had a mind meld going on here or something.
You keep flipping. I won't flip your slides anymore.
No, you're good. I mean, this is healthy. Honestly, the more voices, the different ways that you hear it. Again, I like my classes to be a bit more of a dialogue. I think you guys get more out of this. At the very least, you're less likely to fall asleep on me. Or I might be less likely to fall asleep. Either way. But yeah, I mean, truly that connection, and it comes from rapport and letting them talk. And so a couple of key things to underscore that, if you haven't let them get, they're going to have certain things on their chest, certain key questions, this or that, things they may want to hear. And if you're not letting them get some of that stuff out to invite that part of the conversation, again, those are some of those pieces where at the end of it, they just, just something kind of, nagging, sort of gnawing at them saying, boy, that just didn't quite feel right. I wasn't quite heard, and they feel sort of incomplete with that. And again, that's the type of stuff that invites calling that other broker or what have you. So it's so critical, just like you said, let them talk, let them open up, and the more they do that, the more they feel like they're making that connection. And it's kind of funny over the years, and you guys probably have the same experiences, but, you know, the times I've gotten the feedback that just had a really great conversation with me, really, you know, felt that connection, a great conversationalist, whatever it is, I truly got them. So times where I shut my mouth and said the least, you know, so I don't know what it says. They like me the most when I say the least. You know, my wife probably would fall into that category as well. But, you know, it truly is that dynamic. They want to be heard, so let them do that, let them talk, let them open up, listen, and then again, it's that, you know, so critical. I think probably 85-90% of the time where they make the decision, it's based on that connection. So you're coming in there, I've had those times, I'm sure, you know, this happens to so many brokers where, boy, the words are just coming out like gold, and you're just laying it out there, feeling really good about what you're doing. But you know what? They just didn't get a chance to you know, get that word in to really hear what they needed to hear. And again, you know, you might have had just the most stellar presentation, but it just didn't land, didn't connect. And that next person that sort of went, you know, threw the presentation out and just talked and answered the questions and you know, got to the heart of it, they're the ones that had the chance to succeed. You know, so can't underscore that point enough. Connection, trust, rapport, 2 ears, 1 mouth. That whole dynamic, and then we'll talk about in the steps certain ways to really tee off on that and make sure you're actually building that in as a structural component, you know, in the process.
Just curious, do you have a handout of the slides or? Any
Oh yeah, I am so sorry, guys.
I think they're under.
Oh yeah. My apologies. I just got underway with getting those out to you guys. So further keys to a success, types of listing presentations. So 1 visit versus 2 visit. You know, some people do like to go in and sort of get eyes on the property and all the rest, and come back later in the week for the actual presentation. You know, if that's your process and you succeed with it, awesome. You know, I don't take any issue with that. What I've seen over the years is, as it's gotten more competitive, you know, for listings, there's more marketing going on and more ways that sellers can connect with you know, brokers or potential representation. You do see more competition, and I've just seen enough situations where people had their, you know, their initial, you know, check it out visit on a Tuesday, and we're supposed to come back Thursday or Friday, and you know, they felt like things went fine on Tuesday, but then Wednesday they got a call, Wednesday night, you know, hey, we just had somebody come by and really great discussion, really felt like we made that connection. Look, I know you came by on Tuesday and we're supposed to meet back again on Friday. I think we're good to go. I think we have our representation, you know. So for me, if I got a chance to get in the door, you know, I really want to make sure I get the best chance to tee off on you know, on that presentation, as opposed to having to come back for a second one and leaving things to chance if there was a second meeting or not. You know, a lot of what I look at in real estate is from a probability standpoint. If I'm doing this over and over and over again, what are some ways to stack my effort to just that, give me the best chances on a percentage basis, you know? And so I know that if I'm going in for the 1 FIR and the one-time visit, and I'm, you know, putting all my best, you know, effort forward, and you know, as opposed to if I'm doing the subsequent visit and 10% of the time or 15 or 20% of the time or whatever, that may not happen, right? Well, one's going to have a lower, you know, outcome potential for success versus the other. So hence I kind of sit back because I'm sort of creating these structures and making sure whatever I'm doing gives me the best odds, and avoiding that stuff that maybe, you know, pulls those odds down. So hence I am a big fan of just coming in for the one-time visit. One thing that I do with my pricing, I do see that pricing is a range, not just a dot on a line. And oftentimes if I haven't seen the property, I can kind of surmise, you know, I'll try to get some 411 from people, but you know, oftentimes they might say their home's a jewel and it's nice, but it's maybe not, you know, quite a jewel, or you know, or sometimes even vice versa the other way, they're too rough on their homes, you know, and when you get in, it's actually nicer than anticipated. But I'll basically come in with a pricing as far as an average. And then I'm going to do a scenario where if this is really done to the nines, you know, on the high end, what would that be priced? And on the low end. And I'll even have my presentation, talk about price points, sometimes even net sheets if I get to that, put together that way. And you'll see, actually, one of the first things that you want to do when you get in the listing is really just walk through the home and see what's what. And pretty much instantaneously, you'll know, oh, wow, they're really nice on the top end, or they're here, or they're here. Or I even had some where I said, look, guys, I walked through and you've done everything to the nines. This was sort of the tip top of my price range, but I think we got another 15K to work with them. That's obviously, you know, much easier conversation than the other way. Hey, now that I'm walking through here, whoa, this is way more. But at any rate, you've got your sort of scenarios, and if it is, as I'm going through that walkthrough, and I've got the pricing in mind, if they are on the lower end of whatever those three scenarios are, surreptitiously, quietly, tuck away the higher priced ones. So, when you're saying, guys, I think we're looking at 425, and they're like, well, what do we see there for 450? Can we just do that one? Like, no, that's not what I intended. But, when you have that range, did that point make sense at all?
I was just going to ask a build on one of those. Do they have a number in mind before you share those?
It really depends. Sometimes they're pretty aggressive, or assertive, I should say, as far as, we think it's this, and sometimes that jives, sometimes that doesn't. If either way, we're going to get to it and take out some of those common seller mistakes, and typically they have to do with overpricing. So regardless, we'll kind of get to it. But that one, I think I can't say I ever really came in with, I always do it this way or that way. I think it just depends on the dynamic. And typically it's been more open-ended. They might have a sense of what's what, but then I'm saying, a big part of this is going to be me really doing the data pull, the research, scouring the market to fully understand where we are. And so glad you gave me that number. Let's see exactly where that shakes out with what the market is doing. So I'm already starting to kind of set the table a little bit that you may have certain bones on the map, but some of the stuff might be, still to be answered for sure.
Sometimes it's be careful what you ask, because they've gone to Zillow and looked at the Zillow estimate, and it's like,
and they do.
okay.
I think they all do.
Yeah.
They'll go and Google and see, how much of the houses in my neighborhood. They'll not be paying attention to detail. Like how many bedrooms, how big is it, is it
What
finished?
improvements,
So
yeah.
that's when I think
Yeah.
it's good to know what they're thinking their house is
Mm-hmm.
worth, because that's gonna let you lead the conversation towards, this one does not have this finished basement or the countertops or whatever you want to point to, let them know, yes, you're doing a great job, but this is what we really are at.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's how I say
A little bit more detail than
Yeah.
what their 30-minute Google search provided them.
And oftentimes it is just the Zillow's estimate, Well, I looked at it and says, 485, and can we do that number, And the biggest thing is, they don't really understand pricing dynamics. We do this day in, day out, and we get there's a logic to the market, and, here's what the market's willing to pay, and if it's 450, it's darn near impossible to get 480, I mean, even if you find some buyer that's willing to write for that, you still have the appraisal that comes through. That's the final filter before you get to the actual, sale price. Right, so yeah, I mean, oftentimes you've got some back and forth, or is what they've seen, but it's really, I think, having the right conversation when you've got that trust, to where, frankly, when you're doing it right, and this is typically the response that I got. Philip, we get it. We want 45 for whatever reason. We see that 425 is what it needs to be. Let's go ahead and do that. But that's because I think with what's to come, use some right information, some infographics, some things that are very digestible for them to understand how these things work, and then especially once they get to the comps, like I've laid out the concepts, this is what happens when you overprice, and now I'm showing them the proof in the pudding, so for certain comps, I'll print out the listing history and really tell that story. Oh yeah, these are some ones that overpriced by too much, and look, they had to drop it, and that was 2 more months of mortgage payments, blah blah blah. We don't want to be that. This is how it works, So it's, I think a lot of times where the industry isn't best served is that brokers don't have those discussions, and they don't empower the seller to really. I mean, there's some complexity, but it's not like rocket science to say like, here's how you shoot yourself in the foot when you do this or when you do that. And if you're truly coming from that point of service, you want them to be in the best position to succeed, making all those right decisions that as we talked about add up to the final result. People will latch onto that, and I think that's a type of leadership that you just don't see, leading the client that way nearly enough. In fact, a lot of times it ends up being the opposite, where the client kind of leads the broker, and that doesn't always pan out so well. So the 1 visit versus 2 visit, again, if I'm going in with a price range, and then usually the first step is just to get eyes on, and I've already prepared myself, I can usually pretty much adjust on the fly and know what I'm working with from that point forward. So, if you like the 2 visit, awesome, stick with that. If it works for you, if you run scenarios, or man, just, hey, every now and then I'm getting beat out by somebody else and I'm not coming back in for the second time. I don't want this to happen again. You know that the one visit, but especially with that pricing dynamic, giving yourself some options as you go in, that's really an easy peasy way to kind of succeed with that structure. So one visit versus two visit. And then what I was saying too with sphere versus haven't met, again, people sometimes with the sphere, they're still gonna be clients and they still deserve that right discussion. And so sometimes for us as brokers, we come in, we're just a little bit too casual, a little bit too lax. Well, they're our friends, I'll just chit chat with them about what's what and then we'll get going. And oftentimes it works great, but sometimes they're like, wait, hold on, this is our opportunity and I just don't know if I heard what I needed to hear from that broker. Let's go call some other people, right? So, just reemphasizing that point, if it is your sphere, don't leave anything on the table. Still be ready. I mean, it may end up just being a meandering conversation where you're really just connecting and sort of pointing to some of your structural stuff, the listing presentation, the comps here or there. But you still have all that stuff at hand. You've still done the preparation, still prepared your mind. In fact, what oftentimes happens with the sphere is because you're kind of lax with your client discussion or leading up to it, you're lax with your preparation and you're probably not as dialed in with the market as you should be going into that, right? And, same thing with haven't met. You got to tee off on it. There it's even more critical because you don't have the relationship and you don't have whatever aspects of trust and all those dynamics. So you have to be able to establish that early on. And frankly, that means the right presentation skills, the right, opening up the conversation so they can talk and share and open up and all the good dynamics that happen from there, but also knowing your stuff, having your ducks in a row, having gotten your arms, around the pricing discussions very, very well, because typically when you do get to that pricing, you're showing the comps, you are going to get some pushback here and there. And if you can't, address this or they say, well, why'd the neighbor's house do this or get 50K more? Well, you know what, it's 1,000 square feet more, but if you haven't looked in the market and don't have those things at hand, oftentimes they'll have those questions, and if you're not really teeing off on that or answering that adequately, again, those are those little things that just kind of, just doesn't sit well, and oftentimes invites further competition or where they just decide not to move forward with you and they're going to make other plans somehow, right? So sphere versus haven't met, and then also high information, low information. Sometimes you're going in and they've told you anything and everything, you feel readily assured. Sometimes you don't know a whole lot, even from that pricing standpoint where you're just not even sure exactly what the condition is. They probably gave you a taste of what's what, but until you really see it with eyes on, you don't exactly know where you stand on the pricing dynamic. So again, this is where having a structure, especially with that preparation with the pricing, gives you some benefits. And also with that structure to make sure that one, you've got a consistent approach, you kind of know what's coming next, all that mental bandwidth that might be taxed otherwise, having to think about what comes next, you can focus towards just more reading, the client, reading the situation, hearing the concerns. If there's certain things that they brought up, and they're not always going to spell it out for us, but you might hear a certain thing, come up 3 or 4 times, you're concerned about pricing or this or that. And if you're, cued into it and can read that, well, hold on, I hear you say this, is this a concern? Can we, drill down further in that? Those are sometimes those key things that really like, wow, he really gets us, versus that may have been a moment that you just, walked past and didn't have the benefit of. So whether it's high information, low information, us as brokers got to be able to jump on the fly, having a structure to know that, what's coming next, that helps, and also what the preparation components, from that pricing standpoint. So oftentimes you're not going to have your perfect, everything answered, what have you. You're still going to be able to succeed with that, right? So as far as types of listing presentations, just some of the nuances, and actually probably something to add there too is knowing if you're going in with competition or without. That was a good question. So, all right, so let's talk about these steps. This is the choreography, and again, there's not a lot of magic. I mean, you'll see, I think, when you stack it in that certain, that right sequence, that right order of events, have the right talking points at certain, stages. That is what tends to deliver the best results. But I often tell people in my classes or any of the classes, there's just not a lot of magic bullets in real estate. A lot of it is just really being prepared, knowing your stuff, working it to the extent that you should. Just really doing a good job with your effort. In fact, sometimes I'll use the analogy. It's like basketball players, right? I mean, think about like you're playing a sport. I mean, we all know basketball is a concept. We may not have all played or what have you. But, right, everybody shoots, dribbles, everybody passes. They all do the same things. Why does one person score 25 points a game and the other person 5 points? You know, why does one broker come in for that listing presentation and walk out with, wow, we really made a great connection, this is my listing, versus, you know, the next one kind of coming in and doing whatever and just not getting those results, you know? And it just comes down to mastery. It comes down to taking the basics, the fundamentals, and working them right, and you know, being on top of your stuff. Again, so, you know, if you're looking for that one line or what have you, or that whatever that silver bullet might be, where I roll this out and every time things fall my way, and that's unfortunately not really a reality in this business or probably any business. It comes down to just, you know, having a good process, working it right, and that's what you're going to see here, you know, as far as what's laid out in these steps. So step one, home walkthrough. You know, you're always getting to the home, and you know, first thing is you're knocking on the door, and where do you go from there? So I typically like to start with a home walkthrough. Then we get to the sit-down conversation. Again, first two steps are really some great ways as we open those up a little bit more to get the rapport going, to get them opened up to you, because of, again, all those good dynamics that come from that. Then we'll talk about the listing presentation. Just as mentioned previously, the listing presentation to me is almost an objections handler up front. I mean, we focus, it's educational, there's a lot of stuff that we cover, but if you know that pricing is 95% or 99% or whatever it might be, you know, of the equation to either getting this sold or not, right? And it's not just hitting the market with the right price, but making sure you're having the right discussion to get your clients to buy into that first, right? That's the first filter. If I can't convince my clients, you know, what chance do I have to stand on the market if you know, we're not at the right price point, right? So I got to make sure I'm ready for that conversation, and the listing presentation really does so much good stuff to get you dialed in for the right conversation. Again, position it to where it's us against the market versus the adversarial aspect. Then we'll review the comparables. That's really the proof of the pudding from the concepts I've put forth in the listing presentation. And then we'll get to the pricing discussion. And if you've done steps 3 and 4 well, step number 5 usually kind of falls into place pretty well. Step 6, close to earn the business. Oftentimes it is left open-ended, and if brokers just sort of walk out and we'll see what happens, you know, there's you're probably leaving some stuff on the table. So don't hesitate. You know, ideally, in fact, oftentimes these listing presentations are sort of set up to where it's you know, your chance to earn it, and if you've, you know, passed muster, you're walking out with that listing. But not always, you know, so sometimes seeing if they're ready to make a decision right then and there, and if not, making sure that you're ready for the follow-up and the follow-through. And of course, if they are ready to make a decision, I like to have the paperwork at hand and just get underway with it. We'll talk about exactly how that is, and especially maybe some routines to handle that in conjunction with utilizing like a CTM or something like that, you know, because I want to have the print stuff to put in front of them, but I want to get the electronic signature. Are you guys all CTM users here? Gotcha, okay. Alrighty, so the home walkthrough, right? So to me, you know, listing presentation really almost, I mean, one, I think it starts as you're getting underway with phone calls and scheduling and all that stuff, you know, I mean, so all that stuff leading up to it is already a good way to show that you're easy to work with, you're organized, you're on top of stuff, you know, a little bit of back and forth, you know, if you're calling like, hey, when are we supposed to be meeting again? You know, that's the type of stuff that starts to hollow out, you know, the trust factor. So you are, to some extent, painting the picture early on as you're first getting connected. You know, and if it's Sphere, that's one example, but even when you first met them at an open house or what have you, and, you know, made the connection, earned enough trust to get their contact info to follow up and follow through with them, it all starts from there as far as that picture that you're painting, that you are the right broker to, you know, to take their listing opportunity. But specifically when we get to the actual listing presentation itself, to me it starts when I'm pulling up outside of their house. You know, typically I'll park outside. I don't always park in the driveway. I don't know, it just seems a little kind of a funny thing, but as a broker, a little presumptuous to be, you know, in the driveway. I'll park, you know, typically right in front of the house. I hop out, and I've seen this a number of times where they're kind of peeking out the window, you know, especially if they haven't met me. You know, who is this guy? What's he doing? So I like to walk out. I'm looking professional. I've you know, got my proper, you know, I'm not being too casual in that regard. But as they might be peering out the window, I want to kind of, you know, walk out, take a look at the house from the exterior if I haven't seen it yet. So I'll sort of, you know, walk out looking professional, just take a beat to pause in the driveway and look up. And part of this is frankly for show. You know, say, oh wow, this guy's very cognizant. He's taking stuff in even from the get-go, a very thorough, conscientious broker. But truly also, right, one of the first things, if I haven't seen the property, I still might have some questions on exactly where we fall in the price range. and looking at the exterior. What's the roof look like? You know, is there deferred maintenance? What's the siding look like? Is there, you know, wood rot around the trim, you know, the windows? Or does it look pretty kosher? How's the curb appeal? You know, these are all factors. I mean, you know, you don't have to pause to take that in, but I like to pause for a little bit of the dramatic, you know, sort of impact that they recognize. I'm taking stock of the home from the outside before I progress. So just a little piece where I'm kind of painting that picture that I'm someone that can be, you know, trusted to run their business, right? And then when I knock on the door, typically they're like, you know, oh, what do we do this? Do you want to be in the kitchen? Do you want to be in the living room? You know what, if it's okay with you, I haven't seen the property yet. I think the best thing that we can do is have you maybe show me around. Just take me on a home tour if that's all right. In fact, I'll say, you know, show me around and tell me what attracted you to the property when you decided to buy. You know, what are those selling features? Are there concerns? Any deferred maintenance? Right? And the nice thing with this is it puts them in a leadership role. They're taking you through their house. They're talking about what's this, what's that. You're asking them questions and they're elaborating. And especially sometimes little silly ways to put it, but like, what attracted you to the home when you guys bought it? You know, obviously this home has an emotional appeal, and sort of talking about those things that they really saw as the positives, it just seems to kind of add to the vibe of the mix, you know. But in general, that's my chance to get eyes on, especially if I haven't seen the property beforehand. I mean, even with Sphere, I'll still pretty typically do that. Obviously I've seen the property, maybe not every, you know, room in the house, you know, if it's somebody that I know already have a relationship with. But again, what are their selling features? What do they think are going to be the highlights? You know, and sometimes it might be stuff that I may miss as I'm marketing the property, but having had that dynamic got them to you know, make some of that stuff aware to me, especially if it's something you might, you know, not so easily see with the naked eye, right? But so even with Sphere, having that dynamic where they're talking, what are these key things that make such a you know, good benefit as well, right? So show me around, what are the selling features, what are the concerns, right? And at that point, like I was saying with the one-stop listing presentation, this is my chance to really see, you know, where are we on the price range? Oh, this is pretty rough, bunch of deferred maintenance, probably at the lower end. I'm gonna, you know, surreptitiously tuck my two higher, you know, price scenarios away so they don't happen to see those and you know, want to latch on to whatever that might have been. But you know, usually within about 2.3 seconds, once I'm walking through, I kind of know where we end up on that with the other price range, right? So first thing again is before I sit down, before I just jump into it cold and all the rest, I want to just get the conversation going, you know, get the rapport established, and again, getting them open up. They're talking much more, really, really good dynamics. And then for the sit-down conversation, you know, once we're through with that, you know, wherever's comfortable, living room, kitchen, you know, typically kitchen's a little bit easier. I like being across the table. If we're looking at docs, I'll typically have my comms printed out, and my if we get to the agreements, I usually have leave behind exclusive right to sell filled out as best as I can. So it's a little bit easier, you know, when you're doing that versus, you know, reaching across the couch, but just wherever they're comfortable. And typically, like we're saying, you know, again, it's all about letting the seller, you know, open up and get things off of their chest. So this is a great time to say, look, before I jump in anything, you probably got some hot buttons. Let's just, you know, get that going. Because even if it's something we still cover later in, if I jump into the conversation, all those little questions they've got, they're just hanging there in their head. Oh, we got to get to this, and they're not hearing me quite the same way as had they gotten that out first. It's almost like I see them having a bunch of stuff cluttered in here, and they just need to let that out. So now they've got, you know, an open space to be heard, you know, for me to put, you know, my data points and get those across, right? So it's kind of subtle from the psychology standpoint. And you know, also with this dynamic, they can indicate hot buttons, you know, concerns. Hey, they got, you know, burnt in the past by X, Y, Z. You know, and these are sometimes things where, you know, again, they're not doing this day in, day out, so they might have, you know, certain things that are floating around as concerns. And if I'm not careful with my conversation, you know, sometimes I might maybe say things that sound like it's hitting on that negative stuff or what have you. So I want to hear that first, and then be cognizant, you know, whatever I might need to say, you know. So I'm trying to think of a good example with that. Nothing's actually coming to mind at the moment, but you get the sense, you know, if there's really specific things that they, you know, good or bad that they want to see, knowing that up front, right, you know, one, clearing the air so they got more space to you know, be listening to me, but two, making sure that that's something that I'm you know, hitting on as a hot button or avoiding, you know, good or bad, whatever the scenario is, or maybe rephrasing something so it doesn't sound the same way that maybe it was positioned to them before, You know, because sometimes they hear innocuous stuff, or this is part of the process, but to them that sounds like a big bugaboo because they've misinterpreted something. You know, so all those good things that come out from just, you know, getting that off the table. So I really want to make a point before I jump into it. Let's just clear the air. Let's get all that stuff out. And just as stated, good information to have before diving into the listing presentation itself, right? And so once we've done that, I actually get to the listing presentation. For me, I should have brought along, but mine is printed out. It's nothing fancy. It's you know, made to be in display format, so it's basically the pages like this, and you get all the content here. I have it spiral bound. In fact, with mine, I got it done at Kinko's, and I use the frosted cover because it just doesn't get marked up, and you can, you know, basically keep that just, you know, in your book bag and have it at the ready whenever you need it. Is there a bug? Yeah.
Sorry.
Just stop talking, Phil. Jeez. Okay. So yeah, with that listing presentation, and it's really just hitting those high points. You know, I'm talking about you know, the steps in the process. Again, a lot of stuff, you know, comes on pricing. But it's kind of funny with that, like, I mean, even mine is about, I think, like 15, 16 pages, something. It's, you know, like heavy cardstock. It's pretty robust, pretty thorough. But the first time I used that first listing presentation, I think this is my third listing opportunity, but my first listing presentation where I was using that presentation that I built, I was going through, and I was really making you know, going through every slide, pretty, you know, covering all the, I mean, I wasn't, like, speeding through it, and I certainly wasn't, like, overdoing it and over-talking. But I was taking, you know, each point and putting that out there. And then what I could see as I was reading my audience was they're starting to like, okay, it looks like 15 pages, about 3 minutes per page. Oh my gosh, we're going to be here for 45 minutes. So you start to see, you know, put some pace in it. And so with my presentation, I'm really using it to cover the high points, you know, what's the listing process steps, and, you know, the pricing things. Pricing I will take more time with, but you know, I'm having some pace with it. If there's certain things I really want to drill down, get more information, then I'm gonna, you know, spend some more time there. But if they're just, you see it in their eyes, get to the pricing, get to the pricing, get to the pricing, I'm gonna move on and have that pace and not have it be too much of a drag. You know, I mean, sometimes you say all the right stuff and they love you, they think you're very thorough, but oh my gosh, they just can't listen to this person anymore. He just talks forever and ever and ever. And that's the reason maybe you don't get the listing. As crazy as that sounds, that's sometimes how people make those decisions. So I try just to not fall in that category of like, oh gosh, I can't hear this guy any longer. I do have a lot to say and I can talk and go on and on and on, but I get that that's not going to be the best recipe in that listing presentation dynamic.
Do you ever ask how much time they've got? So like after you've done the walkthrough, they sit down, typically it's in the evening, so kind of people can be tired or they're just getting their kids down or everything. Do you ever just ask, like, just want to be sensitive to your time? How much time do we have for the rest of our conversation?
You know, and again, I'm not sure if that's something I build in as like a structural thing. I'm sure it's come up, you know, or sometimes you get the vibe too, you know, all right, let's sit down, let's sort of get through, and you kind of see that they're, you know, want a little bit more pace with it. But typically most of my presentations, you know, they've set time aside. This is a really key thing. You know, again, this is their opportunity. They want to make the right call with this. And you know, and I want to come in and I mean, I'm going to have my presentation and it's you know, fairly to the point, you know, but it does take a little bit. And if we need to go further into stuff, you know, the open up conversation where we sit down and clear the air, sometimes that can, you know, take a lot of time, what have you. So I've probably through my experience, I would say I haven't been in that many situations where I felt like there's a time crunch.
Okay.
You know, it's tougher when it's competitive. We used to have run a team that was calling on FSBOs and expireds, and that was different because your person it was easy enough to get the appointments, right? But then they'd show up for the appointment, you know, your broker would go out there, there's, you know, they're you know, 10 o'clock appointment, they'd knock at the door at like 9:55, you know, so would come out like, oh, so glad you're here. Listen, we're just finishing up with a previous appointment. If you don't mind having a seat on the porch and we'll get to you soon enough. And so they're sitting there, and then, you know, when it's your turn, you get in there, and, you know, probably by the time you're done, the next person's, you know, waiting outside as well. So for those, it's a little bit more like, you know, get on with it. And frankly, those are tough to succeed with as well, because even if you're trying to do all the right dynamics and the right connections, they've got 3 conversations or 4 conversations scheduled, and you're the second or the third or something like that. You know, you're just, is there phone going on? You know, you just, it's different, and even despite your best efforts and doing all those right things we're talking about here, you know, it's a little bit more of a cattle call, and they just don't have as you know, the same sort of dynamic to be listening to you and for those things to really work. you know.
But maybe
So-
to let them know from the beginning, you need at least 1 hour, you know? Is it okay if I go from 5 to 6?
Great point,
Then if
yeah.
it takes longer,
Right.
well,
Yeah.
you know, you'll know how to go through your presentation, but at least you need 1 hour, cause otherwise how are you gonna do all that, you know?
Yeah.
Walk through, comms, pricing, so.
Or I'll usually say, you know, I want to get through it, you know, fairly effectively, but it's really also, you know, pretty important stuff. You know, certain concepts, just really making sure that you know, we get those across to give you the best result. You know, so I always position everything as you know, we're doing this, or maybe this takes a little bit longer, or what have you, because it is in your best interest. You know, and again, with having a consistent structure, you know, I really can't sort of emphasize, at least for me, that the power in that is you know, even from when I'm first walking out of the car and walking in, you know, in front of the home and all that stuff, I'm a little bit more at ease because I know kind of what I'm doing, what key points I need to hit, and so certain things, again, reading the audience, oh, these guys seem like they're in a rush, oh, they really want to take some time with this and don't want me to you know, move that quickly. When I'm in that dynamic, I can listen and respond a lot more. You know, again, it's that concept, you've got 100% of mental bandwidth to apply. And if 30, 40, 50, 60% is eaten up by just thinking about my next steps and make sure I hit this key point, I don't have the same kind of focus as far as the dynamic, the interplay between us and the sellers. So, so yeah, I go through the listing process steps and overview. You know, here's kind of what's in store, here's how the process works, right? And then so much of what I'm talking about, especially on the pricing side, is handling objections before they arise. But we also do have some slides about staging. So if it's a home that's maybe, you know, could use some staging, maybe it's you know, cluttered or this or that, you know, there's a chance to talk about that. In fact, oftentimes I'll say, you know, I'm going to position this as not, you know, me, Philip Kranefuss, this is my opinion, but this is how the market responds. You know, guys, one thing we may want to look at when we get to the listing period is, you know, staging. And what you tend to see is buyers lack imagination. Buyers are, you know, driven by emotion. They backfill with logic, all the different ways that you can kind of put that. But what happens is when they walk into that home and cross the threshold, there's a little bit of clutter here, a little bit of this and that. And look, I get it. You know, we're all living our lives. You know, our home is busy. I've got kids. You know, you're not walking in there every day and everything's spick and span. You know, but from a selling standpoint, you know, really think about these buyers and what they need to see for us to have the best chance to get them to make the decision that we want them to make. You know, so if it's a little bit decluttered or this or that or deferred maintenance, you know, they see all this stuff, and to them it's just money off, money off, money off, or no offer, right? So if you want to get the most money in your pocket, I think before we get going and going through here, maybe putting some of these things and blah blah blah, or in some cases I might even recommend, in some cases I've even paid for a professional staging consultant. You know, staging consultants like $250 to $350. They're going to walk through the home. They're going to show them how to declutter, where to declutter. You know, other strategies to you know, make the home pop as much as possible. And truly, there is a lot to it. You know, when I look at marketing a property, I think it all starts when they first see that property online. The buyers, right? Use that professional photography. They've got those awesome filters that it sounds anachronistic, but you know, on the one hand, they add warmth. But there's also crispness with it, but it makes the home pop overall. And they see that, and you know, ideally what you're trying to stoke is this, like, oh honey, well that's not bad, oh let's see this property. And if they carry that enthusiasm through the threshold, and there aren't too many points of underwhelmment, or any, oftentimes it's that enthusiasm that then carries through, that's the through line to compelling them to write an offer and going from there. You know, so I'll kind of lay all that stuff out, and again, it's just helping people to, you know, these are difficult conversations. I'm not saying, you know, your home is ugly or you guys are messy or this or that. I'm just saying, as far as for you to have the best experience, to get the most money in your pocket, this is what the home, you know, the best bet as far as what the home's going to look like, and here's some strategies to get there. Right, so we talk about, you know, staging, that type of stuff. I also talk about inspection negotiations, or even receiving offers. You know, like back in the day when there was Short Sale City, like from 2008, 2012, there was just a lot of investors, and probably even, you know, to this day, there's still people doing this, where they'll throw out offers, you know, throw out 50 offers, 100 offers a day, you know, offering 75 cents, 50 cents on a dollar, just to see what sticks. You know, so I'll let them know, like, if we get an offer in where it's low or ridiculously low, don't be insulted. And that can oftentimes be really tough if you're sitting on the market and you haven't had that activity already. You know, they're already starting to feel bad about it, and then you get this really lowball offer that just makes it feel that much worse. But guys, when this comes in, it's just people use a strategy. And so when an offer comes in, we can accept it, we can reject it, we can say, get real. We're not even responding until you come back with something that's at least somewhat remotely, realistic, right? And sometimes they feel good about that, like, oh, if we're insulted with this lowball offer, we can just, either ignore them or kind of put it back to, but you're kind of letting them know that these are the scenarios, because I've seen plenty of situations where, actually, I shouldn't say plenty, but like early on, we had a couple of situations where early listings, they got that lowball offer and were like insulted, or sometimes even blaming the broker. Like, I did something to invite, this type of lowball effort, and I want to just make sure, again, you handle these objections up front, and then when these scenarios come up and you hearken back to what you previously said, it has so much more credibility, so much more legitimacy, and so much more weight to it. So I'm getting that stuff up front, especially if I know there's certain personality types that might be a little bit more angstish, or a little bit more of a hothead or what have you. And that also goes with the negotiations, with the inspection negotiations. Talking about how that is. It's typically a built-in secondary negotiation, built into the transaction. And you may get some people that are realistic with this, some people that aren't. What you don't want to do is be in a situation to where, all of a sudden we're at loggerheads with the other side. Like, sometimes it becomes more about the negotiation, feeling like you've won that battle or not, versus what's the health of the deal. And I've seen sellers sometimes like, these guys don't want to blah, 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 give up on the $350, furnace cleaning bill or furnace servicing bill, and then, forget it. We're not doing anything. The deal's going to die. And I'll say, wait a minute, we don't want to be in a situation to where, we're battling and over $350, we're potentially losing out on a deal that makes all the right, dollars and cents for you. If we lose this, we got to start all the way from scratch, and you never know. The next buyer might have, the same unfortunate negotiation, tactics, what have you. So let's not so easily fall into the situation to where we're battling over whatever it is and failing to see the big picture. And I'm not sure if I did those talking points as much justice as I usually do, but essentially what I'm trying to get is, like, I've just seen a lot of people that sometimes get kind of hot-headed with the negotiations, and truly that, they get lost in the battle and potentially squander what could be, the right transaction.
More emotional than business based.
Truly. And so I'll sometimes, give it almost like a human element. Like, I'll tell, look, I've got a client and almost shot himself in the foot over that, $350 furnace servicing bill. We don't want to be that. So when we get to the inspections, if somehow, those negotiations, we're going back and forth, and it starts to turn to this, look, it's going to be my job to say, hey guys, let's not get lost in the details. Let's pull our head up and just see, do the dollars and cents still make sense? Then who cares about these people? They won or lost the battle, as long as we're getting big picture what we want. And besides, once you close, it's going to just be a funny story you tell your friends, weeks after the fact. And so these things, when you put them that way, I'm just trying to put bumpers on there. Like, I think for all of us, we probably know that there's so many situations or so many times. Probably most of my client discussions have been, let me help you not so easily shoot yourself in the foot. And I'm not saying clients are stupid or this or that. It's, we do this day in, day out. We've seen things where, hey, that looks like it makes logical sense on paper, but when you really play it out, ends up not giving the right result. So we've seen this stuff, and that's leadership. It's our, what we need to be as the leaders to our clients is to show them these dynamics and how it works, and sometimes to save them from themselves. And even if it is a little bit manipulative in some ways, it is in their service, right? It's always in their best interest, but truly that is what we're there to do. And if we're not leading them, there's all sorts of ways you can get squirrely, not just with the price, but mishandling negotiations, whatever it might be, right? So that's again some of the stuff that we're talking about here with the handling objections before they rise. If I know somebody's a bit of a hothead, we get concerns how they might handle a negotiation, I'm going to give them that cautionary tale, and then if we angle in that territory, hey, remember that guy we're talking about that almost pushed away a really good viable deal, over something so minor? Let's not fall in that territory, and if you laid it out the right way, it saves people from themselves, or even potentially save them from just getting that territory to begin with, right? And then really I'm emphasizing pricing, and a big thing of what I'm talking about is how the market works, these dynamics. I'll show you in a few slides what I'm talking about. And really what I'm getting across is price is king. And again, those concepts of, Philip doesn't have a magic wand where I can get 50K more than the next guy. It's about really understanding the market. What is the max the market's going to be willing to pay for your home as it sits, and then getting every red cent, or maybe, just maybe, if I'm really good and stoke the competition just a little bit, overshooting that, just, by a percentage point. Like, a percent over is huge, but people that think like, oh, I can get 8%, 10% over, what have you, that's again the stuff that we want to take out of the equation, these misnomers. right? And then it's like I've said repeatedly, positioning us as a team as opposed to this adversarial sort of dynamic, right? So let's talk about some of these handling objections up front that concept come with the listing presentation. Right, so the first one is I really want to get it across that it's what the market will pay. It's not what we need, or want, or what the neighbor says, or Zillow says, or this or that. It's about reading the market, pulling the data, using my market analysis techniques to divine, what is that right number, and then again, getting every red cent of that. And probably from a listing standpoint, nowadays, just as a listing strategy, I probably would want to be overpriced by just a tick than underpriced. In 2013 to 2018, we had so much overwhelming buyer demand that you could underprice it, and that buyer demand would just, it was like a feeding frenzy, and they would drive that price back up probably to where it needed to be, or sometimes even that created a competitive dynamic that superseded whatever that initial price potential, or the price expectation was. Right? But in this market, we're not going to have that same buyer dynamic where they're so aggressive. I mean, it's still an aggressive seller's market, and we're still at 2.5 months of inventory. So, the seller still holds most of the cards, and the buyer does have to kind of step up, but it's not as extreme as it was. And what'll happen is if you're pricing under, if I leave 5, 10, 15K on the table, I might just get that first offer that comes in a couple days in, or first day, that's full price. And we might be compelled to jump on that before the rest of the competition, might come in, and we've just taken an offer where we left 10K on the table, right? So I'd rather be up than low. But a big part of what I'm talking about, and you'll see in the slide here, is if I have 1 or 2 price adjustments not too far away, I don't mind taking a listing like that because I feel like with the talking points we can get to where we need to be once we're out on the market, and if the market is indicating that we're not getting exactly what we need, So yeah, really, this right off the bat, or I've had people say, we need a net 100K. Look, guys, let's sharpen our pencils. Let's, go through this process with the CMA, with current market analysis. I'll explain how that works. The thoroughness, really, how that gets us that right market, understanding as far as the property should be priced at. And that's going to tell us. And I said, I don't know. Maybe that means we can get the 100K. Maybe it's not quite, the cards, maybe there's more available. But it is market driven. So it's not what we want, it's what the market's willing to bear. And by the way, one point on this too is, do you guys get those Zillow objections? All right, Zillow says this, Zillow says that. Who's dealt with that? Do you guys feel like you've got a good talking point for that, or a good way to handle that? Who likes to handle the Zillow stuff?
Well, I do. I do tell my clients that that's just an algorithm. That they're not gonna come to the house and see all the details and know, they'll just pick up the market and do a very general analysis. So they're not accurate. It's funny because I had a listing and my seller, the house was for $365, and her cousin works for Zillow, so she said, why don't you ask Zillow to give an offer? And she did, and of course Zillow contacted me because I'm the agent, and they offer her from say 360 actually. They offered 340 for her house. Then I explained to her, well, then they gotta make a profit, and this is how they're making the profit. But then you go to the estimate, and the estimate says 360. So it was super funny, but just educating them and letting them know this is how it works, and they do understand totally.
Yeah, and sometimes you do get sellers that Zillow says this, it's 385, and you're telling me 325. How do you take that off of the table? So great point. One, it's an algorithm. There's only so much that a computer algorithm can do. They don't see the local market conditions. They don't see the property itself, right? So it's imperfect. This is typically why you need the human element with all the complexity, all the things you're rolling in to ultimately finish the job. Zillow is going to get you somewhere in the range. It might be high, it might be low, but it's actually, and this is a key talking point for you, it's typically about 8% off on average, right? Plus or minus 8%. You've got a 16% swing there, right? Mispricing a property is sometimes being 1.5% off, 2% off. You've got a range here that is so wide. I mean, you really can't put any stock into it. It gets you a ballpark, but doesn't get you where you need to be. And so what I would have at hand when I was when I was still much more active selling, to take the Zillow's estimate, part of the equation, I would, you can find these articles. How inaccurate is Zillow? USA Today or Realtor.com or, whatever it might be, different like newspaper publications. take one of those articles. So when I hear the Zillow thing and they're really putting a lot of stock into it, I'll jump into the talking point. Well, here's the problem with Zillow. It's the algorithm, blah blah blah. Oh, and by the way, here's an article, not just my word, but here's an article that talks about the inaccuracy and just how you can't put that much stock into it. Truly you need the human element to finish the job. And then I'll say, oh, and by the way, I've got another one here. Kind of funny. Do you guys all know who Spencer Raskoff is? I think it's Spencer. It was, Spencer Raskoff, former CEO of Zillow. Sold his home like 5-6 years ago, and whatever it was, I forget the exact price points, but it was like $500K or $750K off of the Zillow's estimate, right? So, and I think he had it was like 3.8, versus like 3.2 or something. So, it's a different kind of price trajectory, but you're underscoring this. Oh, and by the way, here's even the CEO of Zillow, his estimate was way off and way high, right? So now with those talking points, you've taken that out of the equation. Now, a new talking point, and you brought this up too, that we'll be dealing with probably a little bit more, is the iBuyer stuff, right? It's not just the Zillow's estimate, but it's Zillow offers, and should I look at this, and what's the advantage? To me, there's all sorts of classes. In fact, we do one on iBuyers and blah blah blah. But really, the biggest thing that sellers need to be aware of is they are not going to get the same net, right? They're going to be leaving all sorts of money on the table. It's typically about twice as expensive as traditional real estate representation, right? So for these iBuyers, the ones that have the most, the lowest margins, they're typically about 10 to 12%. Some are 14, 18%, what have you, right? The way they make their margin is classic middleman. Low offer, right? They want to come in, so it's 360, they'll offer 340, you're leaving money on the table there. But then when they're under, they typically have like 4% or 6% holding costs. So it's like the same thing as 5.6 or 6%, as far as real estate commission fees. That's already built in just for their holding costs. And also with a lot of these, they will actually charge the client and take that out of the net for the repairs. And they'll come in and say, you need like $23,000 worth of repairs, right? So people just don't, realize, well, hey, you know what, I might be getting a little bit less than aggressive, full price offer, but with the convenience, not having showings and blah, 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 it's a beautiful thing. But you got to ask them, do you like money? Is money important to you as far as the net? And as far as I know, 9.5, 9.9 out of 10 people that are selling, it's the net. They need those proceeds. And once they realize that, especially the price points we have here in Denver Metro, they're leaving 15, 20, 25K, if not more, on the table with an iBuyer, that's a no-go. Well, I appreciate the convenience, but I'm not willing to pay that much for it, right? So to some extent, when I look at iBuyer, they solve one problem while creating another, right? They solve the problem of the inconvenience, the hassle aspects of real estate, but the problem they create is it's way too expensive.
It has a cost.
Yeah. And in my estimation, as people perceive that cost, and it's our job to help them perceive that. If they don't, they'll see crystal clear, easy peasy. I'm not leaving that kind of money on the table, right? So even back in Open Door came out in 2014, Zillow did their instant offers in May of 2017. Back then, I was going around saying there's no way this is going to be a thing. One, just because it's got that fatal flaw. It's too expensive for what it is, right? Everything's got a value proposition. And sure, convenience, they'll pay some amount for that, consumers will, but they're not paying $25,000, leaving that on the table just for, whatever it is. I'll do showings, I'll negotiate, whatever. Those things might be seen as a bit of a hassle, but again, when it comes to that kind of money, iBuyers is totally, they get blown out of the water. And furthermore, as far as can iBuyer truly, take over the industry? I mean, one, no, not as expensive as it is, but two, it's just a crazy business model. You know what I mean? It's for venture capital to have billions of dollars at play, they put in these different concepts, and this is what you do with it? I mean, imagine my business was flipping cars, right? I buy a $20,000 car and I make a 10 to 12% margin off of that, right? So I'm buying a car, $20,000. By the time I flip it, I'm making, what would that be? $2,000, $2,200, something like that, $2,400. Okay, so if I'm trying to, if I do 3 of those per month to make $6,000, $72,000, I mean that's decent salary. I mean it's not like you're setting the world on fire, but I got to leverage $60,000 just to make a decent kind of what have you. That's what iBuyers on steroids. As far as the use of capital. It's so capital intensive and so much risk there having that laid out, especially if there's a longer days on market or the market starts to decline and, all these things eat into their margins. right? So to have that kind of capital laid out with that kind of risk with it for really not a ton. I mean, most tech stuff, they're looking like 30-40% margin. So at any rate, I kind of went off on a tangent with that. But, you know, as far as us as brokers feeling like, oh my gosh, is iBuyer going to take over this industry? Is there, you know, no longer going to be need for brokers moving forward? I just don't see where iBuyer has that kind of potential. For them to even have 50% of the Denver market, the amount of capital they would need to deploy would already deplete, you know, their operating budget. Right, so it's just not realistic. Where I see iBuyer fitting in is they're going to kind of piggyback off what the wholesale market is currently. People that are less than sophisticated, that are just, you know, where top dollar isn't the primary objective. You know, getting out easy peasy, no hassle. You know, and that's maybe 2, 3, some markets 5% of what's going on. And I think that would be about the max potential. Until they do something different structurally, I just don't see them being a concern. But when it comes to sitting down with your sellers, hopefully this doesn't come out the wrong way, but as a broker, shame on you if you've let your clients go with an iBuyer, not realize the monetary, you know, implications. You know, and again, this is most people, if the net is pretty critical, you know, people are willing to pay for convenience, but not 20-25K, right? So if somehow they're stepping into that, and we've had a chance to talk with them and didn't take that off the table, or at least didn't illuminate that and let them make the best decision for themselves, then shame on us as brokers. You know, we only have ourselves to blame for not being effectively communicating or effectively leading the client in that regard. We don't have time. All right. So that's kind of the Zillow stuff. So here's the other ones that you always hear. Well, gosh, you know, well, can't we just price it high and drop the price later if need be? Right? Or can we just price it high and then let them make an offer and go from there? Well, for both of those, I really want to show them this dynamic, right? So what we're talking about here is this is typically going to be the showing volume that we experience once we hit the market. And what you're going to see is it's front loaded. And in fact, I think nowadays, with the way that the buyers have been trained to be that much more aggressive, you could probably even move this curve back to where, you know, within 1 to 2 weeks you got the peak as opposed to hitting that just at, you know, the 2 week mark. Right? So what I'm getting at here is when we go live, that's our best chance to get the most bodies through the door, right? And again, I want to get that concept across. Once a buyer starts hitting the market, even their first Saturday out looking at 5 or 8, they know what $1 buys them. And if we're overpriced, they're just going to walk through. You know, you just typically don't have that dynamic to where you're overpriced and they're going to, you know, either make an offer or, you know, come back or still be around by the time you drop the price, right? So our best chance is to get it right off the bat and to be priced ideally to where the market's going to respond to it at that time. If we're starting too high, they're going to walk through, they're going to pass on the property because they don't see the value there, and we're going to go through our whole deluge of potential buyers, and then what's left after that? Right? It's a trickle. It's just those people coming, you know, the new people coming on the market, for people dropping down to the price point, people, you know, jumping up in that price point, which is a trickle compared to all the buyers that have pooled on the market and are currently looking and anxiously looking, you know, for that right next property, right? So really what I want to get across there is the importance of making sure that as we hit the market, we are at the right price point. You know, starting too high and let them make an offer, starting too high and we'll drop it later, you miss out on this dynamic. And by the way, start high and let them make an offer. You know, the analogy that I use is typically, you know, if we price it high, what happens is those buyers that, you know, let's say we should be in the 400 to 425K price point, but we price them 425 to 450. Well, in each price segment, you just see, you know, typically the home has a little bit more. So for those buyers looking 425 to 450, you know, they're used to getting X, Y, Z, right? And if should be priced lower because, you know, that's where we sit, but we're in this range, you know, typically the reason is, you know, we only have X, Y to offer, not X, Y, Z. And so we're in this category, this range, and the people are walking through there and they're saying, well, gosh, you know, usually we're used to something bigger, a little bit nicer, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's got the bigger basement, whatever it is. They're just used to more, right? And why would they say, oh, gee, this home that offers less than what we'd like to get, but that's priced here, why don't we make them an offer, a negotiated offer, and blah, blah, blah. You know, it's kind of like the analogy I might use is, you know, if I'm going shopping for a luxury car, you know, let's say I'm looking like for BMW, you know, 3 Series or something like that. You know, it's like 45, 50K, what have you, right? That's the average price for that. If that's what I'm looking for, and I'm going through the dealership, and I see, like, you know, a Ford Mustang. You know, not a bad car. It's a good car as well. But it's not, you know, a BMW or whatever. It's at a different price point, right? So if I'm going car shopping for a BMW, why would I be walking through them and be like, oh, hey, look, there's the Mustang that's overpriced, the same as these BMWs, but I'm going to select that one and offer them a lower price for it. Does that make sense at all? Well, I guess the way that I explained it is that, hopefully I'm doing this talking point justice. I see a lot of like, no, Philip, you're just totally lost at sea.
So we get what you're saying. Yeah, I
Okay.
think the buyer expects to go and find the right price. And say, okay, it's 20K more. Let me offer 20K less.
Yeah, yeah. So
Because
usually,
that's the price. Because
yeah.
that's the right price.
Occasionally when I say this, it actually is a little bit clearer. So my
I
apologies.
think part of it too is when somebody's looking for a home and it's way overpriced, they're gonna think that the seller's unrealistic, and I'm not even getting into that
And that's a lot of
mess.
it too.
I'm not
Yeah.
gonna open that can of worms. Like, there's other houses out there, so.
So have your crisp talking points. Obviously, I wasn't quite as crisp as I would like with these, but essentially what I'm doing here is just talking about the price dynamic, why it's so critical to hit it with the right price right at the start, because that is the best exposure, the most exposure we get to the buyers out there, and the best chance to get that best offer.
I actually had a couple ones, and she was totally fine with the price that I suggested, but he was like adamant, like it has to be, and he was like 30K above what any comp was. And so she was on board, and she was like, Chuck, why don't you show us that one that's 3 doors down, that comp? It was on the market.
Yeah.
Why don't we go and look at it? And she was my advocate. She was like, look at this updated bathroom, look at this kitchen, look at the view. We don't have any of this, and this is
Yeah.
what buyers are going to be seeing either right before or right after ours.
Yeah.
And so she was great because she brought him down to the price point, and we were under contract in like 7 days.
No, that's awesome. And sometimes the broker, both couples are like that, and you've got to be the one that gets them there. But truly, so right now we're talking about these concepts, but exactly once you get to the comps, that's really where the proof in the pudding is, and that's really where oftentimes you can sway that person that's thinking this when it really should be this, right? But so the key is we got to hit the pricing right, and what happens is if we don't when we start, it's typically this dynamic, right? So the red line is the price where we should be at. The blue above is how we overpriced it. And so what happens is as you go and look, they did the first price adjustment of, about just at the start of the third week, right? They dropped it down, price still didn't hit it there, had to do another one. By the time they cross that fair market value, one, you're stigmatized by higher days on market. Two, you also have the dynamic to where, look, it's still an aggressive buyer's market. So when you hit the market at the right price, there's a lot of people who are saying, you know what, let's offer full price because we just want to get our offer taken and supersede the competition, right? When you're 3 weeks in, 5 weeks in, what have you, that dynamic is a little bit different. For that buyer, it's not like, ooh, this is a hot commodity, we got to snap it up before somebody else shows up. They feel like it's theirs, and they can take their time with it, and that means typically more of a negotiated price. Probably means that they're going to be more aggressive with like even inspection negotiations, what have you, right? So the dynamic, the competition aspect, all those benefits that you might get from early on, if you're at this point to where you're just crossing fair market value, weeks down the road, again stigmatized by high days on market, but probably more of a one-to-one conversation between the buyer and the seller, and that buyer probably feels like they've got a little bit more negotiating muscle than they would at the start of it, right? So, and then hence that's what happens, and then you can see that they made a further price adjustment because of the potential inspection negotiations. The buyer's going to have more power there. Plus, what happens when the appraisal comes in low? Ideally, the appraisal should come in at fair market value, especially kind of where we're sitting here. But sometimes appraisals aren't exactly what you like them to be. And again, if there's that, let's say it comes in 5K off of the purchase price, and now you got to hash it out. And if this is something where the buyer really felt like they had to step up to get in and keep this, they're going to be a little bit more pliable at that point. But if you've gone this road where the buyer, perceived throughout the process they have more negotiating muscle, even a negotiation like that, they're going to come out probably on the better end than they may have otherwise, right? So what I'm really trying to show them is again, those, price it high, drop later, price it high, let them make an offer. The timing with the showing activity is so critical to hit it right off the bat in the right way. And when we don't, this is how it plays out. Oftentimes you end up getting less than what you would have gotten had you priced it right to begin with, right? And then this is my favorite one, right? So to me, pricing isn't just this process to then hit the market and here we are. That process stays active as we read the showing activity, the buyer feedback. In fact, this is my most favorite slide because what this does puts a lot of objectivity into it if we have to drop the price after the fact. Like I said, if I have the right talking points and You know, sometimes you got people where they want to stay 10, 15K higher than I'd like. But I'm willing to take that because maybe we get lucky and we're still, you know, in the price range or find that right buyer. But I also know that with these talking points, I can typically, you know, get them down to where it needs to be. And just like you said at the start, you know, talking about how all this stuff works and if you're overpriced, what that dynamic is like so the broker doesn't get blamed for it. You know, it's so important to set expectations up front. I think setting expectations up front is always the best friend as far as salescraft is concerned. But I would also say, don't just have that be a one-time conversation. Keep these dynamics in place so they don't just, they're sometimes so quick to turn around if it's not moving, they start to blame the broker, right? And they start to lose confidence in the broker. You're a few weeks on the market, you know, their neighbor sold in 3 days, and for some reason their experience isn't the same. And then they start to think, well, gosh, what's going on? Maybe Philip isn't marketing properly. Maybe Philip isn't doing this or doing that, right? And then here comes Philip a few weeks later down the road. They're already starting to have some questions about me. Hey guys, we're gonna drop the price 20K. I think that's where we need to be. Oh really? So we've got to take money out of our pocket because of your shortcomings, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Broker. You know, they might go through it once, they might go through a secondary price adjustment, but usually by that price point or by that time, if you're still not where you need to be, you know, from marketing, you know, viability standpoint with the price, then they really start to, you know, it just hits that much harder, and they're just not willing to go with further price adjustments, and typically at that point they've just, you know, lost faith in the broker, and hence that's like the last 4 months of your listing period where they just don't like you, don't trust you, don't really care what you have to say, and you basically just soften up the conditions for the next broker to come and take the listing and succeed that way, right? So, you know, this pricing is so key, and making sure they always understand that this is not, you know, if it's not moving, it's not because I've left some stones unturned or this or that, it's just simply the price is not where it needs to be, right? So when we're talking about that and we're looking at this bullseye, it really just gets this concept across, and then I can underscore it and harken back to it, and it just has all that weight, that power that I needed to have, right? So basically what I'm saying is, my talking point as I go into this is a CMA, you know, the valuation, you know, that we get to. It's a formal process, it's a methodology, but frankly there's more art to it than it being an exact science. You know, there's a lot to interpretation. Furthermore, I'm always going to try to shade high, if anything. Right, and what we see, as we talked about before, if you price too high, you know, things can sometimes sit. So the way that we're going to read this feedback is, and looking at like the yellow, the outer concentric of the circle, if we put this thing out into space, and we've got like 10 to 15 days on the market with like no showings, or very low showings, like it's not even compelling enough when they see it online to, you know, call their broker and want to go check it out, for the broker to, you know, bring them to it. We're probably way off on the price. Excuse me. Or at least a big chunk, and we've got to make a commensurate adjustment to get to where we need to be, right? If we're kind of in that middle, you know, we're not on the bullseye, which is where we need to be, but if we're like the green or the blue, the way that's going to feel is we're getting the bodies through the door, but we're just not getting the offers. You know, and sometimes the feedback gives you that, you know, oh, wish it had a third bedroom, wish it had this, wish it had that, and again, you know, when you interpret that underscores and you know, conveys that same message. Right? But if I've gotten 10, 12, 15 bodies through the door in a market where we know the buyers are pretty aggressive and we haven't gotten a single offer, you know, that's a pattern. That's the market now telling us something. You know, and we're probably not as far off as you know, when it was crickets, right? Nobody, you know, even come to the property, but we're still a chunk off, right? And if where we need to be, you know, we're getting calls, we're getting the nibbles, you know, offers will probably gonna, you know, come soon. And those calls are the, you know, the property, the, you know, hey, this is Philip Cranefoos, 1234 Main Street. You know, not sure if my buyers are going to write or not, but we like the property. You know, what are the hot buttons? Any other offers? Yada yada yada. Right. And by the way, the reason, you know, one thing I always say is, if I'm with a buyer and we're in a property and there's interest, always call. Right. Find out what's going on with it right then. Why wait just to find out after the fact that it's already been under contract? They just, you know, hadn't updated the status yet in the MLS. You know, you want to know if it's in play or not, if there's interest. And also, when I'm calling, I'm getting rapport going, I'm getting, you know, my 411, what have you. And even if I know that we're for sure going to write an offer, I'll still always say, not sure if we're going to write or not, but just curious what's going on with it, right? And the reason I'm saying not sure if we're going to write or not, if I'm a good listing agent, right, and somebody calls me and says, hey, we're going to write an offer, I'm going to have a great conversation, do all I can to encourage that offer to come in at the best price point possible. But guess what my next steps are going to be right after? Anybody? I'm calling anybody else that showed elevated interest, right? A few people that maybe, you know, were interested. Hey, we're getting that offer. may get them, off the schneid, and frankly, that's how I invite that competitive aspect. Also, what I do is I go to my CSS, which is now showing time, right? I'm going to send a mass blast, and I'm going to check everybody's name, except I'm going to uncheck the ones that called and said they're going to write an offer, because I don't really want them to see what I'm doing on the back end. But hey, getting an offer in, if you're interested, step up to the plate. And just that alone can sometimes, even whether you got the offer, second offer, or even just people that are saying, we might be interested, and now I've got something else floating around that gives me just a bit more negotiating juice for with that first offer, right? So, at any rate, that's why I love this slide. And then I always keep these talking points present, right? So when we go active, hey guys, we're hitting the market. Let's see how this goes. Hey guys, we're past the first weekend. Look, we got 7 showings so far. Feedback was okay, no offers, right? I don't think we have to do anything yet, but remember we talked about it, 10, 12, 15 bodies through, and if we're not getting the offer, so just something to kind of keep an eye on. So I think we're okay right now. No need to rush this, but let's see how this plays out. And then if we get to that point, hey guys, here we are a week later, just got our 14th showing. We haven't gotten any offers yet. The feedback's been this, that, or the other. Not all of it overwhelmingly positive. If you guys recall that bullseye slide. It's really just that simple. This is the market telling us. It's the market where the buyers are aggressive. I think at the right price point, we probably would have seen that offer come through. I think what the market's telling us is we're priced just a tick too high, and I recommend a price adjustment of that. And usually, if done right, we're just in lockstep. This isn't like now I've got to convince them. This is like, yeah, we get it. All right, let's go ahead and get underway with it. Right. So again, it's a real establishing the trust, the rapport, the connection, so that there's credibility when I'm talking about the pricing. Not just to begin with, but as far as those adjustments after the fact, that really, sometimes that's where the rubber meets the road or doesn't, because that if you're not priced right, it's just not going to move. Maybe find that right buyer down the road, but you still have the appraisal to contend with if it's overpriced, or you might be waiting for the market to move upward and somehow, meet the price of that listing, but typically, that doesn't happen soon enough. So that if it's not meant to, if it's not priced where it's going to move, it's going to be sitting there until you get it to the right price. So making sure that I've got that mechanism in place, that I've got the dynamic in place with my seller, that if that's how this unfolds, which is very likely to happen, that we're on the same page as far as how to handle that, right? That is the biggest reason where, having that dynamic, you just don't run into those expired listings. And by the way, final point on that, sort of, the objections handler up front, you don't have to work so hard to handle the objections in the moment when you've addressed them up front. So really can't emphasize the key with that as much. And now I'm getting to the comparables, right? So basically, I've used the listing presentation to handle some of those objectives, to talk about the pricing dynamics. It's market driven, not what you need, unfortunately. Here's the reasons that we don't want to, price it too high at the get-go because of the whole, buyer exposure dynamic, right? And now, when I do get to the pricing, which is the next step after this, right? So just sort of take you through the sequence. You walk through the home walkthrough, establish rapport, get eyes on, see where it needs to be on the pricing, side of things if it's that sort of situation. And then I'm sitting down for the that sit-down discussion, letting them get things off of their chest, open up so that I can really create that right rapport, the right connection. And then I get to the listing presentation, which is kind of set up, a lot of it, for now talking about the pricing and the comparables. So I'm looking at the comparables. I used to, have a fancy, cloud CMA-ish kind of, presentation with a lot of pages and all the rest. Over the years, I whittled that away much more so, and really just got to nowadays, I use the showing sheets, the one-pagers, right? That's on your RE Colorado printouts, the last 2, the client showing sheet. I'll print those out for myself because they got the days on market and some of the other information I like on there. But then as leave behinds, I'll have the client. Sorry, I think I said client first. So I'll use the broker one-page showing sheet, which has got days on market and all that information. And then for the client, I'll use the client one-pager, and that also leaves off the other broker's information. I just don't want to hand them a whole bunch of stuff like, we'll just call this agent and see what they have to say. Not that they couldn't do that otherwise, but I just don't want to facilitate that process so easily, right? And when I'm going through this, I'm looking at the sold comparables because that's the only data that I can use to pull into my CMA, right? But I'm also going to put out actives and under contracts. And what I want to really do with this is paint the picture, right? So, hey, here's the sold comparables. Here's 3 or 4 properties. looking at these sheets that are just like yours are very, very similar, and what we can extrapolate is there's a pattern. The market was paying about X amount or so for these properties, and we're very similar and very close and blah, blah, blah. So pretty good reason if this is what they're paying for these very recently, we're probably going to be somewhere in this price point, right? So I'm having that discussion with the CMA, and we're not going to go into detail. That's a whole other class where we talk about the actual CMA, but I'm going to do that justice as far as the pricing. But what I'm also going to do is use those actives and under contracts to tell the story, right? Especially when I get things like, well, blah, 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 why don't we price it here? All right, guys, look, you want to start off at 480? Look, I would love to get you every red cent of 480. We're talking about your property might be worth a little bit less. In fact, let me show you this. Here's a property that's just like yours that's still on the market. In fact, they only started off at 470. And they dropped to 460, and now they're at 455. But look, they're still sitting there after 40 days. So remember what we said, if you price too high, you just sit, and nothing happens, right, until you drop it down to the right price point. So look at these guys, right? And if you're telling me 480, and this is your same home, and it would even sell at 470 or 460 or 455, right? I mean, put yourself in somebody's shoes. Like, would you want to overpay? So if you're seeing this property can't even get 455, and somehow we're going to stick ours at 480, how is that going to work? And that dynamic, and again, I'm usually a little bit more crisp with these talking points, but really, that type of stuff just kind of puts up those guardrails as to like, oh, I see that, we can't go that high. That doesn't make sense for ours. But it's that type of stuff. And especially also showing them like the under contract where you can say, or even with some of the solds, you can look at the history. Oh, look at these guys, right? Same home, start off at 470, 460, 450. Now they hit 440, and 3 days after that they got under contract, right? So, hopefully this is all making sense, but essentially what I'm doing is using the listing presentation to illuminate these concepts, and then I'm proving them with the comps, or at least using those comps as much as possible to tell that story. And by the way, with those comps, I'll print them out, I'll have the leave behinds with the clients. I'm typically going to highlight stuff on there, I'm going to make notes. I mean, part of that's to help me, but part of it's also for show that they see like, oh, okay, this guy's been pretty thorough with this. He went through it. This wasn't just some things I printed up and here's the price point. I want them to really see that there's a thorough process behind this that led to this discussion. But again, when done right, they understand the concepts, they understand the dangers of overpricing and why that doesn't make sense. Even though logically, if I'm not having those discussions, I couldn't blame a seller for saying, why don't we start high and then drop it down later, It's once you understand that the buyer's showing dynamic and all that, oh, okay, that's where that could shoot us in the foot. But if you're not properly educated, same thing too. If a buyer's, thinking 480 and the right price is 440, but I do not have the mechanism to properly show them and get them to buy into, oh, okay, 480 is unrealistic. It truly is 440. If I can't do that conversation justice, shame on me. The client's going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to, think of them as like walking algorithms, right? They're going to do what they're going to do. They're always going to try to get the max price. And unless we've properly put those data points in their head where they understand why some of those tactics may actually work against them, they're going to hold on to them, right? So it's our job to lead them, to get them to where they need to be for their best interest, right? And so that's a lot of what we're trying to kind of convey here with all this, right? So use those comparables to tell the story. Look at the sold listings, data pricing trends. Look at active and under contract, under contract and active listings, the days on market, and then educating the seller in the neighborhood. So then there's logic to the local market. It's not just we pick a random price. You see in your neighborhood here. Here's the high price stuff. Here's the low price stuff. Here's kind of where you nestle in. All those things really just start to get the concept across to them where they need to be best priced, and it takes away this adversarialness and makes us more of a team when done properly. And so by that point, typically once they get to the actual pricing, usually we've got consensus, right? And oftentimes those are the discussions where they're saying, we get it, Philip, we wanted 480, 440 is the right number. All right, let's go, But they've been adequately, they've come to terms with that. If they feel like they're having to leave, money on the table, we still think 480, but I don't know, Philip's really pushing 450. I guess we'll go with it. That's just going to gnaw at them, eat at them. And sometimes even they get that right offer right off the bat. Oh man, did we leave money on the table? So it's again, we've got to put those right talking points, those right concepts for them to best position themselves for success. It's truly a team effort in that regard. So the listing presentation clarifies how the pricing works. Compare will show the pricing specific to their neighborhood, and it really just sets the table for this pricing discussion again, and not a lot of controversy when it goes the direction it should. And then we're kind of getting down to the final stage of this. So as far as net sheet, sometimes I'll show the net sheet at this point. Sometimes I'll wait till we get a little bit further across. Sometimes there's some sticker shock with it, and I'd rather just kind of get everything agreed upon and frankly get the exclusive right to sell listing agreement behind me before we get to that point. But I do typically want to show them the net sheets before we get to going active on the market, just so they know what's what and have a decent sense. Just seems to take away some of the surprises at the closing table or even before you get to there. What do you mean there's fees? So it's good to have those, but again, sometimes I can hold off on that and put that a little bit later in the process. Excuse me. And then also when it comes to the contract, so if these conversations go really well, I want to keep the momentum and ideally get to execution, right? So if they're good to sign and ready, willing, and able, feeling comfortable with it, I don't want to be like, oh, okay, I'll see you guys next week. Just never know. They bump into that agent at the grocery store, and all of a sudden they hit it off with that person. I'm on the outside looking in, so I want to just get down to it. Again, a lot of what I'm looking at is from doing it on a repeatable basis. How do I stack that I've got overall the best probabilities built in for my benefit? And that means if there's interest, let's just get underway with it. Why wait? Strike while the iron is hot, right? So prepare those contracts in advance. Usually what I'm doing is I'm waiting on the disclosure docs, but I'll just do the exclusive right to sell. And usually like prices, I'll keep blank, listing period, start date. I'm always typically going to work with at least a 6-month listing period, so I know what the end date's going to be once I've got the start date, inclusions, exclusions, do they want to provide an SPD or not? These are some of the things that I'll sometimes leave blank and then make a note of. So if we get to this point, I'm just kind of covering all that stuff so I know what to fill in. And either I'm going to go so typically what I'm going to then do is leave the print contract as a leave behind. It's a lot of credibility, a lot of trust. There's no smoke and mirrors. You guys take this. What I'm going to do is button this up electronically, shoot this back to you. It's going to work so much better when we've got the electronic signatures and we can manipulate the document that way and send it back and forth. But I'm going to leave these this exclusive right to sell so you can read it. Let me know if there's any questions, anything that doesn't make sense or concerning. And what you'll also be able to see is when I button up the electronic document, everything is going to be the same, and just we're going to have the information filled in those few blanks that we just discussed. Right, so I think it's a lot of trust when I'm not like, hey, I'll send this to you and they'll sign it, and they're not sure what they're signing. Like they never read it anyway, but know that I left it with them, that everything's going to be the same, that they have the potential to look through it and let me know if there's any concerns. It just seems like it doesn't invite the notion that maybe there's some smoke and mirrors going on or something like that. So it just kind of again sort of builds that trust component. And ideally, there's been times too where we've been there and they just want to get to it, and I'll take my tablet out and I'll finish the rest. You still got to email it to them, and they either do that on their phone or they got their computer, or I'll have them open up their email on the tablet. But basically, if I can get their signature before I leave that appointment, so much the better, right? So being ready, with that part of the conversation, if there's forward momentum, that I'm not like making this a subsequent step. And typically, if you've gotten that far, you're still going to succeed even after the fact. But why leave anything to chance? I've just seen enough stuff over the years in real estate and business overall, where hey, that should have been yours all day long, but somehow you had to come back for it, and then somebody else stuck their foot in the door, and all of a sudden you're on the outside looking in. Right. So contracts. And then closing for next steps, right? So again, the goal is to get the commitment and get to the wanting them or having them wanting to sign the listing agreement, but sometimes they're not quite ready. So one part with this slide is definitely always make sure, when you're at that point, usually it's kind of momentum and it's just sort of unspoken that we're just moving forward with this. But if I need to say, well, how does this sit? Do you feel comfortable with this? Do you feel comfortable moving forward with my representation? I really want to get that on the map, that we're having a discussion. They know I'm trying to earn that business, and if for some reason there are some concerns or hang-ups, that we get that out. But certainly I want to make it clear that that's what I'm angling for. And if for some reason they're not ready to commit at that point, I do want to follow up and say, well, what's the time frame? Okay, looks like you just need a few days to sleep on it. When would be the right time to follow up with you? Right, and by the way, if they say follow up with us Tuesday morning, make sure you follow up Tuesday morning. No quicker way to erode whatever trust you may have built. If they say call us Tuesday morning, and you call Wednesday afternoon, like, oh, were we supposed to talk yesterday? Again, that angst, that fear-based mindset. Wait a minute, we thought this guy was going to be pretty good, and here he is with he's supposed to follow up with us to see if he's got the business, and he even missed that. What kind of representation can we expect if we actually work with this person? We're going back and forth with buyers. So don't do the cardinal sin, which is what so many brokers do. Oh, okay, Tuesday, and then Tuesday comes and goes. The broker forgot about it. The prospect, the client certainly did not. They'll work against you, right? So if not ready to commit, when to decide, and then set those expectations for the follow-up, right? And as far as takeaways, we're pretty much in closing here. It's a process, right? No magic bullets, but it's when you lay it out this way, you can really put the quality in the process. Again, it takes so much of the mental bandwidth, that aspect of potential being taxed with having to figure out what to say each next step. What your process is. It just makes it so much easier to roll through, right? So it's that framework to establish that trust, the connection, and ultimately, as you really get your arms around whatever your process is, you may already be doing this, that's where the best results come from. And another point that I was kind of making that was bleeding really throughout the overall presentation is, educate, empower your client, right? Put them in a position to succeed. The best clients are the ones that we've led the right way. We've illuminated them to some of these concepts. And, going back to that transaction string of decisions, they will be right there along with you, helping make the best decisions versus each one of these waypoints. You're doing this and really having a struggle, right? So none of this is really a magic bullet, but you can see there's some logic to this where may benefit as you take some or all of this and perhaps impart that in your process. And that was our presentation. So thank you guys very, very much. Hopefully you got something out of this. Again, if not the whole process, just a few takeaways. But really appreciate you guys' time. Appreciate your engagement. I love the questions, the back and forth. And yeah, without further ado, I guess that is the
We have 10 minutes to ask a
sure.
question. So how do you handle objections, like a lot of people who are so stuck on, oh, how much business have you done? What are your numbers? What are your sold? How much have you sold this year? Like a lot of people think that that's an indication of whether you're a good agent or not.
Yeah.
And I tend to disagree, but because they might be part of a large team and they're kind of using those numbers. But how do you kind of handle those types of questions?
Yeah, first part is hopefully I've got some trust so that whatever words I lay out will have some consideration.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll talk about it, and that's some of the stuff too. Like you were saying, how do you know if, when you're dealing with competition? Sometimes those are some good talking points as well. Sometimes with these teams, and they sound very high powered. Mm-hmm. What you do run into is you get the presentation from the big dog that knows all the right words to say, and then you get the junior broker that's actually going to handle your stuff, and oftentimes experience. Or even sometimes you get that broker. In fact, let me kind of come at it. This is sort of an internal talking point, but think about this from a real estate business concept standpoint, right? You can be phenomenal at lead gen, and pardon my French, be a crappy broker. You do a lot of business, right?
Yeah.
You can be a terrible, with lead gen and an awesome broker, and you're gonna have a harder time, right? So what you want to get out there is there's a lot of agents out there that do a ton of deals, and they, they want to work with somebody that's. Obviously, if you're brand new, you're gonna have certain talking points, but look, I'm a hard, not hardcore, I should say, but like I'm a dedicated, effective broker, and I do X amount of business because I really put the quality in, for my clients. This is a tough business, and there's only so much bandwidth. So sometimes what you see with some of these mega teams or really powerful agents that knock out 80, 100 deals, you're hearing, wow, this person does a lot. They must be, really great. They're great at picking up a lot of business, but sometimes just the structure of real estate, again, you need a lot of care and consideration for your transaction. If this person's juggling 5 or 6 deals a month, that's where it goes sideways. And and sincerely, there's a lot of big name brokers that you guys have probably heard of where I've been on deals with them on the other side, or coach brokers, and you see, in fact, it's maybe another talking point you can throw in this. It's like that lazy agent sort of dynamic. Like everything is like, you got to ask them 3 times to get the signature on this. You're almost like past deadline. Negotiation stuff. It's all haphazard, whether that's up front or especially like with the inspection negotiations, and you just see where it plays out, like, wow, that client is really not well served. You can see where on paper, oh, this guy is like a rock star, I got to go with this person, but the actual experience, I'm like, and so you see that right away. I remember one broker I was coaching and did a deal with this guy. I'm like, oh yeah, I know him. That dude does a ton of stuff. And I never done any deals with that broker. But like 6 hours later, that same broker that I was coaching comes back in the office like, well look, there's this and we still need that. And I'm like, oh my God, I guess this guy's one of those lazy agents. Here's how this ride is going to feel for you. You're going to have to babysit him. You're going to have to follow up 3-4 times to get stuff going. They're going to, potentially miss deadlines. You got to kind of save them from yourselves. So that's the reality with a lot of those guys. So, getting some crisp talking points. And frankly, if I was back in the game selling like I was, I really always would try to work backwards and have kind of crisp, succinct ways to lay that out. But that there's X amount of objections you're always going to hear, and that could be one of those. Well, gosh, how many have you done? And we like someone that's done 80 deals a year, and how do you address that? But knowing that that's your ride, again, pretty good chance you can set your watch by it that you're going to hear it. Having the best crisp talking point, working that out, and even sometimes it's an evolution. I've said stuff, and that's how all this really evolved. Where at first I'm kind of pressed and pushed, and I say something, you kind of get like okay, maybe that carries some weight. And obviously I'm leaving that moment and saying, okay, that came up, I handled this way, didn't get exactly what we're looking for. How would I do that next time? It's a constant process of improvement. I mean, frankly, that's the benefit of having the structure too, is like any listening presentation, if you got what you got and you got the desired result, think through what went well. What do I really need to make sure I keep, in that process? But then also thinking about what didn't go well. Would I potentially lose them? Or, if you didn't get the listing, trying to find out what that is, and then making sure that you're hardened at that stage, So if you lose one based on we're not sure about your experience level, man, I'm going to make sure I'm sitting back and really, thinking through that. In fact, probably one final point with that, I'd probably Google some stuff.
Yeah.
There's so many agents out there putting stuff online, and there's a lot of clutters as far as the content, but there's a lot of really good stuff. And frankly, you just find that one person that's got the right line and well, I don't have to figure that out myself. Hey, here's a really, really good thing to say. Let me just make that my own. And now I've got that objection handler. People always feel like there's about 100 million different objections, probably like 7, 8, 10 that you might hear over and over. Having your talking points and being ready for those as they come up, that's going to help you.
Any counsel on sometimes the sticker shock when you get to the net sheet?
I gotta get
on
Yeah,
Thank you so
thank you.
much.
Yeah.
on the 6% on the commission fee, especially when there's like a Redfin that would discount brokerage that would give it a flat rate.
Yeah.
Any counsel on overcoming those objections?
Yeah.
You get what you pay for.
If that's you really,
I hate to say it that way, but it's true, and a lot of people don't realize there's also quite a few hidden fees.
Yes.
So you're charging, let's say, 6%, and they could be paying upwards of 8, 9, 10%. Truly, when it comes down to their fees, I had a friend who, same objection, they went with the discount who didn't end up being a discount. So, that's a big thing too.
Great.
Yeah, so I and what you said there too is with any of this stuff, I think it's real key. I didn't mention this in the presentation, but when you get to these objections, having that quick, snappy line that encapsulates it, that's the tip of the iceberg that, bam, that hits home, they get the concept, and now I can roll the details out from underneath that underscore it. But if I start with the details and this and that, then it just kind of sounds like waffling. So having a powerful line, for me, if I hear the iBuyer stuff, look, if you like money, if the net is important to you, you're going to see you're leaving way, way more money on the table. And that's actually, we do a class, so that's that iBuyers, discounters, how do you speak to your clients about that. With the discounters, that's, you get what you pay for. And then when you look subsurface, what you're saying is an unsavvy agent, I mean, it's one thing as far as the dollars and cents, as far as the commission structure, but you look at the whole transaction, where you're priced, inspection negotiation, appraisal considerations that come up, all the different things. There's plenty of room for a subpar agent to lose you, thousands of dollars. And so truly in that concept, you get what you pay for. You go with this resource, it looks that much less expensive, on table, here's the savings, but they underprice your listing. You left $6K on the table there. They're, juggling 30 deals a month, so they did a crappy job with the inspection negotiation. You didn't, you lost out some more there. And all of a sudden, whatever small benefit that you might have had is collapsed because of the money they left on the table. And then furthermore, the customer experience for someone that has, such, again, for a lot of people, a lot of angst, a lot of, some scary stuff when they think about their opportunity. And once they start working with some of these, some of them have a 5 p.m. That is their end of day. They write that in as, yeah. So, man, like when you typically get the news that the loan didn't go through on like loan termination deadline, or what used to be loan objection deadline, usually like 4:55 p.m. And it's still a scramble to get that, amendment extended out by midnight. Now I've got like 5 minutes to work on that. Plus, they also have different people. At least with one of them, I think the one that you're thinking of that has the 5 p.m. So, you got a fire to put out, or you're working through it, the first day, you're talking with this person, you do X, Y, Z, the next day, it's the next person, you got to get them up to speed, then get to wherever you're going. So for a lot of the clients, they really realize, like, man, like, money is important, but I'd rather pay a little bit extra than to go through this really, really tough, sort of process where they feel like they're on their own, they don't know what's going on, but they're potentially leaving money on the table. By the way, as far as Redfin's concerned, do you know how much, like the typical Redfin agent, do you know how many deals they do per year? About 36, right? And that's like an average one. Like a Rockstar Redfin agent, 90 deals, 110 deals. As much consideration as each transaction needs,
No bandwidth.
there's no bandwidth. I mean, and they got TCs and systems to create efficiencies, but when you really need to that agent to work through and get that last grand or whatever with the inspection negotiations, are you going to get that from the Redfin agent? No. So you get what you pay for. That's
They care
you
about
hit
the
the
money,
money.
then they don't.
I
care
have a
about the
perfect
money.
example that you can use, just
Okay.
super fast
Sure,
story.
sure.
It was a buyer I was working with. We were looking in a specific condo complex. There was actually 5 listed. It was a pretty big complex. The one that he wanted, was with one of those discount rate places. One, we couldn't get a hold of anybody on the weekend. And then 2, those other condos sold and finished and were done before ours ended up falling apart and we went elsewhere. But
No way.
all of those sold and were done before we were at that one. When we went back and looked, because we eventually were like, we're done trying to deal with you. It was still on the market.
What a great
Also,
example.
So
Is
it's
there
like,
any way
Thank you.
to see your actual listing presentation?
thank you very
like
much.
the
Have a
booklet,
day.
or-
Yeah,
I'm
give me
curious
your
about,
cards.
Like,
Yeah,
am
shoot that
I
over.
editing
Thanks a
that, or
lot.
what do I have in there? Is it still accurate? Do I want to change anything?
Yeah, and
You know
mine's like
that?
super, super simple.
Right, and I would like to keep mine simple. Like,
Yeah.
you don't want it to be so much.
Exactly.
But
They
I am
lose
curious.
Yeah, no, love to send that to you.
Thanks. And then on the net sheet, I just had a question. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
for
when
sure.
someone's first loan, do you just guess what that is? Because you can't always say to somebody, "Hey,
Great
what do
point.
you-"
So oftentimes with the net sheet, I don't want to take their loan info, their
Mhm.
payoff.
Mhm.
I've seen situations where they told the broker the wrong information,
Mhm.
and then they had a certain net,
Oh yes, because then they
And
have
then it
something
was-
in mind and it's not there.
It's not-
and then they get to the closing table and they still blame the broker for it. You know,
Yeah.
so I think what you want to say is, call for your payoff. Here's the number you need to. This is what you're walking away, and then you'll know your payoff.
So when you're
Or if
leaving
it's
them
true.
with a net sheet, you're just saying, hey, we don't know, I don't know what this number is. So I didn't
And there
put
might
that
be
in.
situations where we've talked about it, but I'm definitely going to say, make sure you get the right one.
Yeah.
And I'll even bring that up. Like
Yeah.
I've seen it where you've gotten the wrong info, and then you're working with what you think is the wrong net, and we don't want to have you surprised come
Yeah.
closing table time. So make sure it's the right one. But otherwise, I'll just give you what you're walking away with, and then you can subtract your net from there.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then my other
Good.
last question is with iBuyers, right? So I've been working with a lot of buyers right now, and they're very apprehensive. There's a lot of homes now on the market, like
Yeah.
by Open Door or Zillow, right? And I don't know how they work. Have you had any experience with that? Are they good with communicating? Will they negotiate under inspection? Sometimes I could even see that they're losing money already.